Good morning. I'm David Gibson, Director of the Center on Religion and Culture, and your host for this morning's event. I just want to note right up front that this event is being organized and co-sponsored by the Amazonic University Program, PUAM, which is part of the Ecclesial Conference of the Amazon, which you'll hear more about, along with the Association of Jesuit Universities in Latin America, our confreres in the Latin American continent. We thought in North America we were very fancy because we have 26 Jesuit colleges and universities. In South America, they have, Fernando, 31? 31? See, I shorted them by one, so. It's a wonderful collaboration that we have going on here. Again, we're pleased to see you all out here in person. Not great weather, but a spring morning, and spring is coming, and it is the Feast of the Annunciation. So thank you very much. Now, this event itself came together quite quickly in the last few weeks when we found that our colleagues here today would be in New York for the United Nations Water Conference, which was held this week. It's the first UN conference for safe and sanitary water. I understand is the first conference in 20 years or something. Is that true? 40-something. What? 40-something. In 40, more than 40 years. It's the first. It's
1977.
1977. Christiana, our theology, our water expert. It's insane, really. But finally, they've had it. Huh? So anyway, they were here, to represent the Amazon and all of these interests at the United Nations this week. But in a sense, this gathering has been 3 years in the making. We were planning an event like this with many of these participants, and we're very excited to host it 3 years ago when, of course, the global COVID-19 pandemic intervened. That pandemic took so many lives, caused so much suffering and disruption, and yet it also revealed even more how interconnected our world is. As Pope Francis has stressed, this new situation is an opportunity to see our weaknesses and our challenges, but also to respond to them in creative and faithful ways. One of those creative ways was Pope Francis's approval of what's called the Ecclesial Conference of the Amazon. Now, a lot of this sounds like church talk, and Cardinal Barreto can explain, and others, but Pope Francis convened a synod, one of these global meetings at the Vatican, which we're doing increasingly under Francis, for the Amazon in 2019. Yes, 2019, dedicated to the Amazon region, which was the first. Usually it's on a theme, on women, lay people, whatever. It was on the Amazon region. Coming out of that, and we can talk more about that fascinating movement because Pope Francis has put such a stress on the environment and the social aspect of our care for the common home. But coming out of that, Pope Francis authorized for the first time ever the creation. Usually we have a country bishops' conference. You have a hierarchy of bishops, then you have lay people who go to church. This is an ecclesial conference made up of bishops, priests, lay people, religious, regular Catholics, a unique governing body, and it covers 9 different countries around the Amazon, an area larger, I think, than Western Europe. As our friend Cardinal Barreto here said at the time, it is the first of its kind in the history of the church, and it is the first concrete fruit of the Amazonian Synod. It's a remarkable development for the Catholic Church, but also for our planet, as it gives this enormous and critically important rainforest region a collective voice and presence at a time when human rights and the environment are facing grave threats. That's why we're here today. That's why they are here for the United Nations Water Conference. So here's how we'll proceed. Each of our panelists will speak briefly, just 5 minutes or so, about particular points that they want to highlight today. Then I'll open up a discussion, pardon me. I'll open up a discussion among them and with you all, the audience. With Maria translating, this should work just fine. Feel free to ask your questions in either English or Spanish, and please, above all, silence your cell phones. That's international. Thank you very much. First, we will hear from our friend Cardinal Barreto. First, I should do an introduction. You have programs there. Cardinal Pedro Barreto is a Jesuit, so he feels at home. So I hope. He's president of this newly created Ecclesial Conference of the Amazon, SEAMA, and he's a member of the board of the Amazonic University Program. Again, this new university program for the Amazon, which we will hear about. He's an outspoken defender of human rights and the Amazonian environment, and is a close collaborator with Pope Francis. Cardinal Barreto.
Muchas gracias.
Thank
Quiero
you
agradecer esta
so much. I
oportunidad
want to
de
thank you
estar
for this
aquí
opportunity to
en
be
esta
here
prestigiosa
at the
Universidad de
prestigious
Fordham,
Fordham University,
creada y fundada en
created and founded in
1841,
1841.
es decir, hace
That's
182 años.
182 years ago.
Larga historia de
Long history
servicio
of service
en la
in the
evangelización de la
evangelization
cultura y
of
de la
culture and
educación.
education.
En segundo lugar, quiero
Secondly, I
hacer
want to
mención que hoy
mention
día es un día
that
muy
today is a
especial
very
para la
special
Iglesia
day for the
Católica.
Catholic Church.
Celebramos la
We celebrate the
anunciación de la
Annunciation
Virgen
of the
María
Virgin Mary
y la
and the
encarnación del Hijo de
incarnation of the
Dios
Son of
en
God
nuestra historia.
in our history.
La creación de Dios
God's
es
creation
maravillosa.
is
Dios es
marvelous.
creador y
God is
escogió
creator, and He
un lugar
chose
muy
a
humilde
very
de la
humble
tierra,
place on earth.
que la tierra es un punto
And earth is an
insignificante, podríamos decir así,
insignificant
de todo
spot,
el
we could
universo.
say it like that, of the whole
Como
universe.
dice el mismo nombre,
As the
universo
very
es un
word
solo camino.
universe says,
El
universe
camino que
is
nos lleva
only one
desde la
path.
creación
The
a
path that
Dios.
takes us from
De Dios
creation to
venimos
God.
y a Dios
From
vamos.
God we come, and to
Y
God we
dentro
go.
de esta
And
creación,
within this
Dios nos
creation,
regaló a
God
toda la
gave us
humanidad
all
un
humanity
bioma,
a
un
biome,
ecosistema
a
vivo
living
que
ecosystem
abarca 7
that covers
millones y medio
7.5
de
million
kilómetros
square
cuadrados.
kilometers.
Estos 7 millones
In
y
this
medio
7.5
de
million
kilómetros
square
cuadrados
kilometers
discurre un río,
runs a river,
el río
the
Amazonas,
Amazon River,
que recorre
which runs for
6.500 kilómetros
6,500
desde
kilometers
su
from its
inicio
beginning
en la parte
in the
andina
southern
sur del
Indian
Perú
part of
hasta
Peru
su
to its
desembocadura.
mouth.
Es decir,
In
es
other
un
words,
río,
this
la
river
madre de todos los
is the
ríos.
mother of
Son
all rivers.
1.800
There are
millones, perdón,
I'm
1.800 afluentes
1,800 main tributaries
principales
of
de
this
este
river,
río,
apart from many others.
aparte de otros muchos más. Por tanto, estamos
Therefore,
hablando de un
we are
caudal de
talking
agua
about a
dulce
freshwater
que es
flow
uno de
that
los
is
más
one of
grandes
the
de todo el
largest
planeta.
on the planet.
Hay una unidad
There is a
en este
unity
bioma.
in this biome.
La historia de los
The
estados
history of the
dividió
states
por fronteras.
divided by
De
borders.
hecho, el bioma
In
no tiene
fact, the
fronteras.
biome has no
Y al no
borders.
tener fronteras,
And
estamos
by not
hablando de
having
una
borders,
unidad.
we are talking about a
Y
unit.
dentro de esta
And within this
realidad de la
reality
Amazonía,
of
hay
the
numerosos
Amazon,
pueblos
there are
indígenas
numerous ancestral
ancestrales,
indigenous peoples,
poblaciones que tienen
populations
siglos
that
de
have
historia, de
centuries of
tradiciones, de
history,
cosmovisión,
traditions,
a los cuales el
worldview,
Papa Francisco los llamó
whom
los
Pope
guardianes
Francis
de la
called the
naturaleza,
guardians of nature,
guardianes
guardians
Amazonía.
of the Amazon.
La señora Patricia
Miss Patricia
Hualinga, que es del
Walinga,
pueblo
who is
originario de
from the native
Sarayaku
people of
en
Sarayaku
Ecuador,
in
es la
Ecuador, is
vicepresidenta
the
de la
vice
Conferencia
president of the
Eclesial de la Amazonía,
Ecclesial Conference of the Amazon.
porque al ser una conferencia
Since it is an
eclesial,
ecclesial
incluimos
conference,
a
we
todos los
include all
bautizados y
the
bautizadas.
baptized people.
Por eso
That
nos
is
alegra
why
mucho
we are
estar
happy
aquí
to be
con dos
here
damas o
with
mujeres
two
que
ladies
nos
or
pueden
women
acercar
who can bring us
para escuchar
closer
las voces
to
de la
listen to the
Amazonía.
voices of the Amazon.
El Papa
Pope
Francisco
Francis
nos habla de
speaks
la
to us
querida
about the
Amazonía.
beloved Amazon.
Cuando uno quiere
When
a
you
una
love a
persona,
person,
se le escucha
you
con mayor
listen to them
pasión,
with greater passion,
con mayor
with
profundidad.
greater depth.
Cuando no se quiere
When
a
you
una
don't love a
persona,
person,
bueno,
well,
oímos, no
we hear,
escuchamos.
we don't listen.
Y el Papa
And
Francisco
Pope
nos habla
Francis speaks
precisamente
to us
de
precisely
escuchar a la
about
querida
listening
Amazonía,
to the beloved Amazon,
a las culturas, a
to
las
the
personas
cultures,
que viven
to the
ahí,
people who live
que
there,
tienen tradiciones,
who
que
have
tienen una
traditions, who
cosmovisión y que
have
tienen una
cosmovision,
religiosidad
who
que
have a
vive en
religiosity
armonía
that lives in
con la
harmony
naturaleza
with
y
nature
entre
and
la
among
misma
the
comunidad.
community itself.
Por eso
That is
podemos
why
decir
we can
que la
say
Amazonía es un
that the
gran
Amazon
desafío para
is
la
a
Iglesia
great
y para la
challenge for the
humanidad.
church and for humanity.
Maltratar la Amazonía,
To mistreat the
maltratar
Amazon, to mistreat
la
the ecology,
ecología, el contexto,
the context,
despreciar las
to
culturas
despise the
amazónicas,
Amazonian
nos
cultures
hace de alguna
makes us
manera
somehow
pensar que estamos
think that we are
despreciando
also
e
despising
insultando
and
también a toda
insulting
la
all
humanidad.
of humanity.
Porque la Amazonía es para
Because
el
the
mundo,
Amazon is
no
for the
es
world.
solamente
It
para
is not only
nosotros.
for us.
Y por eso la
And that
Iglesia
is why
quiere
the
unir
church wants to
lo
unite
que los
what
hombres
the
y
men
mujeres del mundo,
and the
los
women of the
políticos han
world, the
dividido.
politicians have
Si
divided.
Jesús ha venido al
If
mundo es para
Jesus
unir,
came
no
into
para
the
dividir.
world, it is to
Y
unite,
en
not
este
to divide.
sentido,
And
la
in this
Iglesia
sense, the Catholic
Católica es una
Church
iglesia sin
is a church
fronteras.
without borders.
Ya no se habla
We no
de
longer
la
speak
Amazonía
of the
brasileña, de la
Brazilian
Amazonía
Amazon, the
ecuatoriana,
Ecuadorian
la
Amazon, the
Amazonía boliviana o
Bolivian or
peruana, o
Peruvian
de Guyana
Amazon,
o de
or
Surinam
Guyanas, or
o de
Suriname,
Venezuela,
or Venezuela's.
sino hablamos de la
We
unidad que es
talk about
precisamente lo que
unity.
Dios nos ha regalado.
It is precisely what God
Hay
has
grandes
given us.
desafíos. El
There
primer
are great
desafío es
challenges.
cómo
The
cuidar
first
la
challenge
vida
is how to take
y
care of
respetar los
life
derechos
and
de
respect
las
the rights
personas que
of
viven
the
en la
people
Amazonía,
living in the Amazon,
especialmente de los
especially
pueblos
native
originarios.
peoples.
Un dato que es muy importante,
A very
que
important
de los
fact
9 países que
is that
conforman
from the 9
todo el
countries
bioma
that make up the
amazónico,
Amazon
Brasil tiene
biome,
el
Brazil has
63% del
63%
territorio.
of the
Sin
territory.
embargo,
However,
tiene menos
it has
población
less native
indígena
indigenous
originaria que los
population
demás
than the
países
other
que tienen
countries that
un poco más
have
del
a little
30%
more
del
than
territorio. Y nos
30% of the
preguntamos por qué.
territory. And we wonder
Porque hay
why.
voces de la
Because
Amazonía,
there are
hay
voices
clamores
from
y
the
hay gritos de
Amazon, there are
dolor, de
cries and
sufrimiento,
cries of pain, of
no
suffering,
solamente del
not only
pasado,
from the past,
porque han diezmado
because they
la
have
vida
decimated
humana,
human
la
life,
vida de los pueblos
the life of
originarios
the native
y la vida
peoples, and
también
also
de la
the life
naturaleza.
of nature.
Pero hoy
But
también se
today,
sigue maltratando, destruyendo,
environmental
asesinando a
leaders
líderes
continue to be
ambientales.
mistreated,
No
destroyed, and
solamente es
assassinated.
escuchar las
It is not
voces,
only to
sino
listen to the
compartir el
voices,
sufrimiento,
but
la
to
sangre
share the
derramada
suffering, the
en este
blood
territorio
spilled in this
sagrado,
sacred territory.
como de alguna
As
manera el Papa Francisco en
Pope
Puerto
Francis
Maldonado en
said
Perú
in Puerto
manifestó.
Maldonado in Peru, said,
Pisamos una tierra sagrada,
we are
la
stepping
tierra de la
on
unidad,
sacred
la
land, the
tierra
land of
donde Dios
unity, the land
quiso
where God
morar
wanted to
a
dwell
través de
through
muchos
many
hermanos y
brothers and
hermanas de
sisters
poblaciones
of native
originarias de los que viven
populations
ahí.
and those who live
Por
there.
eso
That is
Vamos a
why
dar
we're going
gracias a
to
Dios
thank
por
God for
esta
this
oportunidad
opportunity
de hacer escuchar la
to
voz de la
make the voice
Amazonía
of the
a
Amazon
través de
heard
personas
through
que viven
people
en la
who live in
Amazonía,
the
como
Amazon,
es
such
la señora
as
Patricia
Miss
y también
Patricia
Carol,
and
que
also
viene de
Carol,
Puerto
who comes
Maldonado.
from Puerto
Muchas
Maldonado.
gracias.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Eminence, for that very wonderful testimony. And thank you for introducing our next speakers. Patricia Gualinga, we will want to hear from you next. Patricia is known for her work as a defender of the human rights of the Quichua people of the Sarayaku, an indigenous community in the Ecuadorian Amazon. She is also, as Cardinal Barreto mentioned, Vice President of SEAMA and a member of the Amazonic University Program. Patricia, thank you.
Buenos días.
Good morning.
Muchas gracias a la
Thank
Universidad
you
de
very
Jordan
much to
por
the Fordham
invitarnos
University
y gracias
for
estar aquí.
inviting us, and thank you for being here.
El cardenal Barreto ya hizo la
Monsignor
presentación.
Cardinal Barreto
Yo
has
vengo de un
already made the
pueblo
introduction. I come
se
from a
denomina el
town
pueblo
that is
del
called El
mediodía, el
Pueblo
pueblo
del
del
Mediodía,
cenit,
the
aunque su
town of the
nombre
Senate,
es en quichua
although its
sarayaku,
name
que
is in
significa
Quichua
río de maíz.
Sarayaku, which means river of
¿Y
corn.
por qué este
And
pueblo
why
tiene ese
does this
nombre?
town have this name?
En la visión de
In the
nuestros
vision of our
ancestros,
ancestors,
dicen que es el
they
pueblo que
say that
luchará
they
hasta
are the
los
people who
últimos
will
tiempos.
fight until the end of
Y
time.
entonces por eso tiene ese nombre
And
y es muy
so
conocido
that's
por ese
why it
nombre.
has that name and
Y
it is
como
well known
lo
for that
dice la
name.
leyenda,
And
mi
as the
pueblo es un
legend
pueblo de
says,
lucha,
my people
un
are
pueblo que
people of
defiende la
fight,
Amazonía,
people that defends the
un
Amazon,
pueblo
people
que dice
who
el
speak up.
denominado desarrollo nos
The
está
so-called
destruyendo
development is
y no
destroying
todo
us,
puede ser
and not
destrucción.
everything can
La
be
Amazonía
destruction.
tiene que
The
transmitir vida.
Amazon has to transmit life.
Somos un pueblo
We
que
are people
a raíz de nuestra
that as a
resistencia se
result of
convirtió
our
en un símbolo
resistance became a
para otros
symbol
pueblos.
for other people.
Y eso ha sido bueno,
And that has been good,
porque gracias a eso
because
todavía hemos
thanks to
podido
that,
mantener
we
nuestros
have still
bosques
been able to
amazónicos.
maintain our
La
Amazon forests.
presencia de los pueblos
The presence
indígenas
of
ha
the
logrado
indigenous
que
peoples
exista la
has made
Amazonía
it
todavía,
possible for the
sin
Amazon
tanta
to exist
depredación.
without so much
Una
depredation.
Amazonía
An
es
Amazon
agreste, pero una
that is
Amazonía hermosa.
wild, but a
Una
beautiful
Amazonía
Amazon.
que
An
es
Amazon
también la
that
creación
is
de Dios.
also God's
Que eso no se
creation.
nos tiene que olvidar.
And we must not
Que una
forget that.
creación tan
That
bonita como el
creation,
ecosistema, el bioma
that a
amazónico,
creation
no se
as
puede
beautiful as the
destruir
Amazonian ecosystem
solamente por
biome
intereses
cannot
económicos.
be destroyed only for
Y en base
economic
a eso,
interests. And based on that,
me he hecho varias
I have
preguntas. ¿Cuál
asked
es lo
myself several
importante de
questions.
nuestra
What is so
esencia de pueblos
important about
indígenas?
our essence as indigenous peoples?
Porque para muchos podría
Because
ser
for many
incomprensible.
it
Y
could be
nuestra esencia
incomprehensible,
fundamental
and our
es la
fundamental
relación y la
essence is
comunicación
the
con la
relationship
naturaleza.
and communication with
Es
nature.
ese conocimiento
It is that
profundo de
deep
la naturaleza.
knowledge of nature.
Es ese conocer
It is that
cada
knowledge
esquema de los
of each
ecosistemas.
scheme
Es
of the
esa comunicación.
ecosystems.
El
It
pueblo
is that
indígena se
communication.
comunica
The
con la
indigenous
naturaleza.
peoples communicate with nature.
Y para ustedes
And for
y
you
nosotros que somos
and for
católicos,
us who are
yo pienso que eso no
Catholics,
es nuevo.
I think that is not
Pues
new.
ya tienen un
I
santo que
think
hablaba con
that
la naturaleza.
you already knew.
Hablaba
You
con la
have a
hermana
saint who
lluvia,
spoke with
hablaba con
nature.
el
He
hermano
spoke with
lobo, y a
Sister
todos les
Rain. He
trataba como
talked with
hermanos.
Brother Wolf,
Y lo
and he
extraño
treated all of
y
them
lo
as brothers.
coincidencial
And
es
the
que
strange and the
nuestros sabios
coincidental
también les
thing
tratan
is
como
that our
hermanos,
wise
mi
men
hermano,
also treat them
mi
as
hermana.
brothers, the
Entonces
brother, the
tenemos
sister.
muchas
So we have a lot of
coincidencias dentro de
coincidence
nuestra visión.
within our vision.
¿Cómo es que me involucro en la
How
SEAMA?
is
Porque
that
soy
I
de
got involved in
vicepresidenta de la
SIAMA?
SEAMA, alguien que lucha por los
Why am I the
derechos y
vice
está por
president
ahí.
of a
Porque
SIAMA?
siempre
Why
me
am someone
pregunté,
who
¿por qué
fights
la
for
iglesia,
rights
después
and
de
is out there?
bautizarnos,
I always
después de
wonder why the
hablar sobre
church, after
Cristo y la
baptizing us
justicia,
and after talking
nos
about
dejaba
Christ
solos
and
en nuestra
justice,
lucha?
left us alone in the struggle?
¿Por qué la institución de la iglesia no
Why
se
didn't
comprometía
the
a
church
acompañarnos?
institution commit itself to
¿Por qué no nos
accompany us?
escuchaba?
Why
Y el
didn't
Papa
it
Francisco
listen
nos
to us?
escuchó.
And Pope Francis listened to us.
Escuchó y
He
sintió la Amazonía
listened
desde
and
lejos
felt the
porque no es un
Amazon
papa
from
que era de la
afar
Amazonía,
because
es un
he's
papa que
not
es
a
de
pope
Argentina.
who was from the
Y eso yo
Amazon.
pienso
He's
que la
from
única cuestión
Argentina.
es que es
And
obra
I
del
think that the
Espíritu.
only reason
Un
is that
papa que
is the
siente
work of the
y ama la
Spirit.
Amazonía
A
cuando
pope
nuestro
who
clamor y
feels and
nuestra
loves the
voz
Amazon when
estaba
our
pidiendo y cuando
clamor
nuestras
and
oraciones
voice was
estaban
asking for it and when our
dirigidos a
prayers were
eso.
directed to
Solo
that.
lo puede ser
It can
obra del
only be
Espíritu.
the work of the
No tengo
Spirit.
otra explicación.
I have no other explanation.
Y ese ha sido el momento
And that
en que me
has
he
been the
involucrado.
moment when I
A
have been
decirles,
involved in
acompáñennos.
telling you to join
Vean
us.
el rostro de
See
Dios
the
y de
face
Cristo
of
en la
God and
Amazonía.
of Christ in the Amazon.
Sientan en la Amazonía
Feel
la
the
presencia de
presence of
Dios.
God in the Amazon.
Porque
Because
ahí
there,
los pueblos que hemos sido
the peoples who
marginados,
have been marginalized,
abandonados de la sociedad,
abandoned by society,
estamos
are
pidiendo a
crying
gritos que haya
out
justicia.
for justice.
Y ese es el camino que
And
está
that
tomando la
is the
SEAM, la
path
Conferencia
that being
Eclesial
taken by the
Panamazónica
SIAMA, the
liderada por el Cardenal
Pan-Amazonian
Ese es
Ecclesial
mi rol
Conference led by
como
Cardinal Barreto.
Patricia,
That
como
is
hija
my
de
role
los
as
primeros
Patricia,
catequistas amazónicos,
as
de
daughter of
hacerles
the first
entender cuál es nuestra
Amazonian
misión
catechist,
profunda,
to make them understand what
donde
our
la
deep mission
iglesia pueda
is, where the
inculturarse,
church can inculturate
donde
itself,
la iglesia
where
pueda
the
ver
church can
la
see
esencia de los
the
pueblos
essence
indígenas.
of the indigenous peoples.
¿Qué tiene que ver con la lucha? Yo
What
sigo
does this
siendo
have to do with
activista.
the struggle? I continue
Yo
to be an
continúo,
activist. I
tengo
continue.
múltiples
I have multiple
actividades.
activities.
Trabajo con los
I
derechos
work
de la
for the rights of
naturaleza,
nature.
trabajo en la
I work
defensa de
in
la visión
defense
de
of
los
the
pueblos
vision of the
indígenas,
indigenous peoples.
denuncio el
I
extractivismo,
denounce
pero
extractivism.
ahora tenemos un
But
aliado que
now
es
we
fuerte
have a strong
y un
ally
vocero
and a
internacional muy
very
conocido
well-known
como es el Papa
international
Francisco.
spokesperson as Pope
Necesitábamos
Francis.
esa
We
vocería.
needed that
Y ya no solo
spokesperson,
somos
and it
nosotros
is
los que
no
estamos
longer only
hablando desde
us
la
who are
Amazonía.
speaking from the
Y hay
Amazon.
la institución de la
The
iglesia que se está
institution of the
comprometiendo
church that is
a
committing
decir,
itself
vamos
to
a caminar
say
de
that
manera
we are
conjunta.
going to walk
Y yo he
together.
leído la Biblia
And
y
I
hay
have read
tantas
the
cosas
Bible, and
bonitas
there's
que nos
so many
identifican
beautiful things that
y que están
identify
ahí.
us and that are
Cristo de
there.
lucha, Cristo
Christ
de
of struggle,
cambio,
Christ of
Cristo
change,
sin temor,
Christ without
Cristo la
fear, Christ
transformación.
transformation.
Y estas cosas
And
nos
these
animan.
things encourage us.
Esto nos
This
anima a caminar.
encourage us to
El
walk.
sínodo dice que es caminar
The
conjunto. Yo
synod says
participé en el
walking
sínodo
together. I
y estamos
participated in the
caminando.
synod, and we're
Tal
walking.
vez no tan visiblemente para muchos,
Maybe not so
pero lo
visible
estamos
for many,
haciendo.
but we are doing
Y
it.
si la gente,
And if
los
the people,
católicos,
the
las
Catholics,
diócesis,
the
las
dioceses, the
iglesias se
churches
comprometen en
are
este caminar
committed to
conjunto,
walking
seguro que será
together,
más
it
llevadero.
will certainly be
Pero
more
la
bearable.
transformación está
But the
viniendo
transformation
y
is
yo creo que
coming.
ya a este
And
paso
I
nadie lo va a
believe that
poder
no
detener.
one will be able to
Porque no es
stop it at
cuestión
this
del
pace
hombre ni de los
because it's
pueblos
not a
indígenas,
matter of
es
men or
cuestión
indigenous
que viene
peoples,
del
it's a
Espíritu.
matter of the
Eso es
Spirit.
lo que yo puedo
And
compartir.
that
Muchas
is what I
gracias.
can share. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Gracias, Patricia. Thank you. Well, let's hear next from Carol Harry. Carol is the Human Rights Coordinator for Caritas, which is the Catholic Church's development and relief network. She's located in Madre de Dios in the Peruvian Amazon, and she is a participant in the Human Rights School of the Pan-Amazon Ecclesial Network. Carol?
¿Cómo están? Muy buen día.
How are you? Good morning.
Para mí es un gusto poder estar
It
hoy,
is a pleasure
compartir
for
con
me to be
todos
here
ustedes.
today to share with you all.
Es importante para
It
nosotros
is
poder
important
tener
for
estos
us to
espacios donde
have
podamos
these
dar a
spaces
conocer
where we
el
can
trabajo
make
que venimos
known
desarrollando en
the
la
work we
Amazonía.
have been developing in the Amazon.
En mi caso, soy
In
abogada,
my case,
trabajo
I'm a
con
lawyer.
Cáritas,
I work
he
with
pasado un
Caritas.
proceso de
I have
formación
gone through a training process,
y venimos acompañando a
and
pueblos
we have been
originarios como parte
accompanying
técnica
Native peoples
dentro de la
as a
defensa de
technical
sus
part in the
territorios.
defense of their territories.
Es un compromiso que tenemos.
It is a commitment
adquirimos dentro
that
de
we
un
have
proceso.
and that we acquired within
No
a
es fácil
process.
trabajar en la Amazonía
It is not
porque es
easy
una
to
realidad
work in the
bastante
Amazon
compleja.
because it is a very complex
En la región de donde
reality
yo provengo, Madre
in
de
the
Dios,
region
Perú,
where I come from, Madre de
y
Dios,
creo que a
Peru.
nivel de toda la
And I
Amazonía
think that in the whole
pasamos
Amazon region, we're
conflictos
going
muy
through
difíciles de poder
conflicts
superar.
that are very difficult to
En
overcome.
mi región
In my region,
tenemos 5 áreas
we
naturales
have 5
protegidas,
natural protected
tenemos una
areas.
reserva
We
de
have a
pueblos en
reserve
aislamiento.
of peoples in
Esto debería
isolation.
suponer
This
que
should
el
mean that the
Estado
state
debe de proteger a los
should
pueblos
protect
originarios.
the native
Esto
peoples.
debería de suponer que el
This should
Estado
mean
brinda las
that the
condiciones
state
adecuadas
should
para la defensa de
provide
sus derechos.
adequate conditions for the defense of their rights.
De igual forma, debería
it
de
should
representar
also
un acceso a los derechos
represent
esenciales.
access to
Hablamos de
essential
derecho a
rights.
salud, derecho a
We talk
territorio,
about the
derecho al
right to
agua,
health, the right to
pero
territory, the
sabemos
right to
muy
water,
bien que
but we
todos estos
know
derechos
very
son
well that
altamente
all these
vulnerados.
rights are strongly
No
violated,
solo porque existen
not
brechas, como
only
lo llaman los
because there
estados,
are gaps,
brechas
as
para
the
acceder a
states call them,
educación, brechas
gaps
para
in
acceder a
access
salud,
to
sino
education, gaps
simplemente
in
porque no
access to health,
existen
but
servicios de
simply
salud,
because there are
no
no
existen
health
servicios de
services, there
educación,
are no
no existe
education
acceso a agua
services,
segura.
there are no access to
Cuando
safe
hablamos de
water.
agua, hablamos de
When we
Amazonía, es algo
talk
que yo
about
siempre
water,
digo.
we talk
Y
about the
pensamos que el
Amazon.
hecho
That
de
is
que
what I
haya
always
agua
say. And
dulce
we
en la
think that the
Amazonía
fact
quiere
that there is
decir
fresh
que los
water in
pueblos
the
originarios
Amazon
tienen
means that the
acceso a
native
agua,
peoples
pero
have
esta
access to
agua
water.
que
But
consumen
this
directamente
water
es agua
they
que se
consume
encuentra
directly
contaminada
is water
por
that is
actividades extractivas.
contaminated by extractive activities.
Madre de Dios,
Y Madre de Dios,
la actividad principal
the main
es la minería,
activity
una
is
minería
mining,
informal, una minería
informal
ilegal,
mining,
que al
illegal
año
mining, which
deforesta 115
deforests
hectáreas, que al
115
año vierte a
hectares
los
per year
ríos
and dumps
181 toneladas de
181
mercurio.
tons of mercury into the rivers
Esto
per year.
afecta
This strongly
fuertemente a los
affects
pueblos
the indigenous
indígenas y
peoples
más aún a
and
los
even
pueblos que se
more
encuentran en
the peoples
contacto
who are
inicial
in the
o a
initial
los pueblos que
contact
están en estado
or
de
the
aislamiento.
peoples who are in the state of
Pueblos que no
isolation.
tienen una voz
Peoples
para
who
poder
don't have a voice to
expresar qué es
be
lo que está
able to
pasando.
express what is
En
happening.
este proceso que tenemos
In
como
this
iglesia,
process that we have
tratamos
as a
de
church, we try to
empoderar a los pueblos
empower the regional
originarios.
peoples.
Tratamos de que ellos
We
puedan tener
try
esos
to give
espacios
them
para
those
dar a conocer qué es lo
spaces
que está
to make
sucediendo
them know
y
what
sobre
is
todo para que
happening,
ellos
and above
puedan
all, so they can have
tener acceso y defender los
access
derechos
and
que se les están
defend the
negando hoy en
rights
día
that are
por
being
priorizar
denied to
otras
them today by
actividades.
prioritizing other activities.
Un claro ejemplo
A clear
de cuánto daño están
example
haciendo esas
of
actividades en la
how much
Amazonía
damage these
es que
activities
en la
are doing
región
in the
amazónica de
Amazon
Madre de
is that in
Dios,
the Amazon
la
region of
comuni-
Madre de
la-
Dios,
los
the
pueblos indígenas
community,
o las
the
personas que
indigenous
pertenecen a pueblos
peoples or the
indígenas
people
tienen
who belong to the indigenous peoples have 5.3%
porcentaje de mercurio en la sangre
of
más
mercury
que un
in their blood,
ciudadano que
more
está
than a
dentro de
citizen
la
who
ciudad, digamos
is
así.
inside the city
Entonces
area.
podemos ver
So we
que
can see
los
that
pueblos
the
originarios no son
native
prioridades para las
peoples are
políticas
not
estatales.
priorities for the state policies.
Esto implica una gran
This
responsabilidad
implies
para
a great
nosotros, quienes
responsibility
estamos
for
en
us
territorio
who
acompañándolos
are
en
in the
esta lucha
territory,
constante.
accompanying them
Por
in
eso
the
es
constant struggle.
importante
That is
que
why it is
podamos
important that
acompañar
we
en este
can
proceso desde una parte
accompany the
técnica
people
a los
in the
pueblos para que
process from
ellos
a
puedan
technical
tener
point of
estos
view
espacios
so
para que
they
puedan
can
venir y
have these
presentar sus
spaces so
casos
they can come
por
and
ellos
present their
mismos.
cases themselves.
Nuestra labor como
Our
iglesia,
work
nuestra
as
labor
a
como
church,
técnicos
our
dentro
work
de la
as
iglesia
technicians
es
within the
poder brindar
church
las
is to
herramientas
be able to
necesarias para
provide the
que ellos puedan
necessary
exigir
tools
sus
so they
derechos,
can
para que ellos
demand their
puedan
rights, so they
plantear
can
políticas
propose
basadas en su
policies
realidad
based
y
on
para
their
que ellos puedan ver
reality,
este
and so they
desarrollo de
can
acuerdo a su
see this
cosmovisión
development
indígena.
according to their indigenous cosmovision.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you very much. Next, let's hear from Father Fernando Ponce, a Jesuit as well, who should feel at home here. He's also studied up at Boston College or at Weston, so he's very familiar with the church in the United States. He's a president of the Pontifical Catholic University of Ecuador, and he's a board member of, how we pronounce it, Ausschau. Ausschau. It's the Association of 31 Jesuit universities in Latin America. Father Fernando.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I am happy to be here because I'm setting a personal record. This is my third time at Fordham in this week, for many reasons.
No.
To see
Be careful.
the president and
Be careful or they will hire you here. You will never leave.
No. And secondly, in order to honor your language, I will speak in Spanish. So I don't want to destroy your beautiful language. Hay muchas
Well,
cosas que yo
there are
quisiera
many things that I
compartir
would like
con
to share
ustedes,
with you,
pero me voy a
but I'm
centrar
going to
en una
focus on a
pregunta que
question
nos podemos hacer.
that we can ask
¿Qué
ourselves.
pueden hacer las
What can
universidades por
universities
la
do
Amazonía?
for the Amazon?
¿Qué puede hacer la academia?
What can academia do?
Bueno, la SEAMA,
Well,
bueno,
SEAMA,
hay muchas respuestas.
well,
Y
there
la
are many
SEAMA
answers.
ofrece una de
SEAMA
esas
offers one of those
respuestas.
answers.
La Conferencia Eclesial
The
Amazónica
Amazon Ecclesial
ofrece una de
Conference
esas
offers one
respuestas
of those answers,
y la pensó, la
and
propuso
they thought
en
of
el
it and
Sínodo
proposed it
Amazónico.
at the Amazon Synod.
De hecho,
In
la
fact,
SEAMA me decía el
SEAMA,
cardenal tiene
the cardinal told me, has
150 propuestas.
150
When I
proposals.
talk about just one of those 150 proposals, tiene, por ejemplo, algo
It
que es muy
has, for
importante
example, something that is
internamente,
very
que es
important internally,
ministerios de
which
las
is the
mujeres.
women's ministries.
Tiene que
It
desarrollar,
has
se
to
ha puesto como
develop
tarea
them.
desarrollar el rito litúrgico
They have set
amazónico.
as a task to develop the
Y tiene esta
Amazon
tercera propuesta que es el
liturgical
programa
ritual, and they have
universitario
this third
amazónico,
proposal,
que
which is
es
the
a la vez
Amazonian
externo
University
y
program,
también
which is
un
both
desafío para la
external
iglesia.
and also a challenge for the church.
La idea de
The
crear
idea of
una
creating a
universidad
Catholic
católica amazónica,
Amazonian University,
que hoy la llamamos
which
Programa
today we
Universitario
call
Amazónico,
the Amazonian
está en el
University
documento
program,
final
is in the
del
final
sínodo.
document
Y voy
of
a
the
leer
synod.
no
And
la
I'm going
cita,
to read it,
pero sí
not
las
the quotation,
principales
but the main
guidelines, o las principales
orientations
orientaciones que dice la SEAMA para la construcción de
that
esta Universidad
SEAMA
Católica
gives for the
Pan-Amazónica.
construction of the Pan-Amazonian
Primero,
Catholic
la
University.
teología
First,
debe ser
theology
inculturada
must be inculturated
y debe incluir
and
la
must
formación
include
conjunta,
joint formation
para ministerios
for lay
laicales y
ministries
formación
and
de
formation
sacerdotes,
of priests,
basada
based
principalmente en la Sagrada
primarily
Escritura.
on sacred
Una teología
scripture,
inculturada
and
tanto para
inculturated
laicos y
theology for both
seminaristas.
laity and seminarians.
Segunda orientación,
Second
las
orientation,
actividades de investigación,
research,
educación
education,
y
and
extensión.
outreach activities.
Dicen outreach, community outreach, o the like, deben incluir programas de
Community
estudio
outreach should
ambientales
include environmental
y
studies
estudios
programs
étnicos.
and
Los
ethnic
dos
studies.
énfasis.
Those are the two emphases.
Entre los estudios ambientales,
Among the
ponen,
environmental
por ejemplo,
studies,
conocimiento teórico
he says,
ambientado
for
con la
example,
sabiduría de los
theoretical
pueblos
knowledge
que viven
set
en
with
la
the
región
wisdom of the
amazónica.
peoples living in the Amazon
Y como
region.
ejemplo de los
And
estudios
as an
étnicos,
example of the
descripción de
two
los
ethnic
diferentes
studies,
idiomas.
description of the different languages, and so on.
Tercera orientación,
Third
la
orientation,
formación de profesores,
teachers training,
la enseñanza y la producción de
teaching
material
and
didáctico
production of
debe
didactic
respetar las
material.
costumbres y
It
tradiciones de
must
los pueblos
respect the
indígenas,
customs and traditions of the indigenous
elaborando
peoples,
material didáctico
elaborating
inculturado
didactic material,
y realizando actividades de
cultivated,
extensión
and
en
carrying
diferentes
out
países.
dissemination activities in different countries and regions.
Y al final,
And
esta
finally,
parte termina con un
this
pedido.
part ends with a request.
Pedimos a las
We
universidades
ask the
católicas
Catholic
de América
universities
Latina
of
que
Latin
ayuden a
America
la
to
creación de
help
la
in the
Universidad
creation of the
Católica
Catholic
Amazónica
University
y
of the
acompañen
Amazon
su desarrollo.
and to
El
accompany
pedido
its
en especial para
development.
las universidades
It is a
católicas,
request
que luego
especially
ha
for
sido
Catholic
extendido a otras
universities,
universidades
which has
católicas
been
del
extended
mundo
to
para
other
apoyar
Catholic
este
universities in
programa.
the world to support
Ahora,
this
¿qué
program.
hemos hecho hasta ahora
What
en
have we
respuesta?
done so far in response?
Sé que tengo 5 minutos.
I know I have 5 minutes, so
Voy a limitarme.
I'm going to limit myself.
Se ha constituido
We have
lo que nosotros llamamos un programa
set up what
universitario que es
we call a
diferente
university
a una
program, which
universidad.
is different
El
from an
programa
university.
universitario
The university
intenta
program tries to
articular
articulate
proyectos ya
existing
existentes y
projects
proyectos
and
propios.
projects of its own. Second,
Segundo, el programa
the
universitario
university
no tiene
program
un
does
campus
not have a
físico
certain or a
determinado o
specific
específico en un
physical
país.
campus in a
Generalmente,
country.
cuando uno habla de
Generally, when one
Universidad Católica
speaks of a
Amazónica,
Catholic
la primera
university of
pregunta
the
es,
Amazon, the
¿dónde
first
está?
question is, where
¿Cuál
is it?
la sede principal?
Where is the
Pues
main
no tiene una
campus?
sede principal,
Well, it
es la
doesn't have a main
articulación
campus.
de
It is
los
the articulation of
que
programs
algunas
that
universidades ya
some
ofrecen
universities already offer.
y Sí, ya se citó algo, por ejemplo, un
For
programa en
example,
derechos
a
humanos,
program in
derechos de
human
la
rights,
naturaleza
rights
y
of
defensa
nature, and
de los
defense
derechos
of
de
the
los pueblos
rights of
indígenas. Son
indigenous
cosas que ya
peoples.
existen
Those are
y son
things that already
consideradas
exist
parte
and
de
are
este programa.
considered part
Pero
of this
obviamente nos
program.
falta
But
mucho
obviously, we
todavía
still
por
have a long
identificar
way to go
y
to
articular.
identify and articulate.
Hay más de
There
20
are more than
instituciones
20
de educación
institutions of
superior
higher education
en la
in
región
the
amazónica
Amazon
de todos los
region.
países. Brasil
Of
tiene
all
un
the
buen
countries,
número,
Brazil has
pero
a
hay
good
otras
number, but there are other
universidades. Mi propia
universities.
universidad
My
donde yo
own
trabajo
university
tiene ya
where I work
un
already
campus en
has
la
a
Amazonía
campus in the
y un centro de
Amazon and
investigación
a
en la
research
Amazonía.
center in the
Y así
Amazon.
20
And there
instituciones
are
públicas
20
y
public
privadas.
and private
Entonces el programa
institutions. So the
articula,
program
pero no
articulates, but it
construye
doesn't
edificios, no,
build
no es la
buildings.
intención
It
principal.
is not the main intention.
El programa
And
sigue
the
cuatro
program
valores,
follows
cuatro
four values,
sueños
four
tomados del
dreams
documento del
taken
Papa.
from the Pope's
Rápidamente, el
document.
sueño
Very
social,
quickly, first of all,
defensa
the
de los
social
derechos de los
dream,
más
defense of
pobres
the
y de los
rights of the
pueblos
poorest and
originarios,
of the
el
native
derecho,
people,
el sueño
the cultural
cultural,
dream,
mantener la riqueza
to
cultural de
maintain
la
the
Amazonía,
cultural richness of the
el
Amazon,
sueño ecológico,
the ecological dream,
custodiar la
to
hermosura,
guard
la
the
belleza, la
beauty, the
riqueza natural
preciousness, the natural
de
wealth
la
of the
Amazonía y el
Amazon,
sueño
and the
eclesial,
ecclesial dream,
fortalecer a las
to
comunidades
strengthen the
cristianas
Christian communities
para que puedan
so they
entregarse
can
y
give
encarnarse
themselves
en la
and
Amazonía.
become incarnated in the
Cuatro sueños del
Amazon.
Papa Francisco en su
These are
documento.
four dreams of the Pope
Eh,
Francis in his document.
Entonces estamos en un momento
So we are in a
de
moment
desarrollo. Es una
of
idea en
development.
progreso,
It is an idea in
pero
progress,
tiene concreciones
but it
reales como
has
las que yo
real
acabo de mencionar.
concretions like the
Incluso
ones that
tiene
I just mentioned. It
un espacio
even
físico, tiene una
has a
estructura
physical
jurídica
space. It
propia
has its own
que
juridical
funciona en la
structure
Universidad
that
Católica
functions in the
del
Catholic
Ecuador.
University of the
Y
Ecuador.
estamos en un momento en que
And we
vamos
are at a moment in
intentando
which we are
encontrar
trying
un
to
camino
find our
propio,
own way
porque queremos ser,
because we want to
nos
exist.
piden que seamos universidad,
They
o sea,
are
tiene que tener
asking us to be a
títulos
university.
académicos,
It
grado y
has to
posgrado,
have
decimos
on their
undergrad,
graduate and graduate degrees.
studies, both levels. Y al mismo tiempo
And at the same
sabemos que no
time,
toda la
we
población
know
puede
that
acceder
not
a,
all the
no
population
tiene
can
estudios
access or don't have
secundarios suficientes para
enough
acceder
secondary
a estudios
education to
universitarios.
access
Entonces
university
queremos ofrecer
studies.
cursos
So we want to offer
complementarios,
complementary
cursos
courses, professional
profesionales. Y última
courses
cosa,
before.
la
And last
tecnología es muy
thing,
importante.
technology is
Vamos a
very
hacer un
important.
programa, de
We
hecho
are
ya
going
somos
to
un
make a
programa que
program.
nos
In
apoyamos
fact, we
mucho
are
en la
already a
tecnología.
program that relies
Estamos
heavily on
siguiendo el
technology,
modelo
and we are
educativo y
following the
tecnológico
educational and
de una
technological
iniciativa
model
que tal vez
of an
ustedes
initiative
conozcan,
that you
Jesuit
may be
Worldwide
familiar
Learning,
with, Jesuit
empezó
Worldwide
trabajando en los
Learning,
campos de
which started
refugiados,
out working in refugee
Siria y
camps in
otros
Syria
países,
and other
y que
countries,
nos está
and is,
digamos, prestando o
let's say, lending
entrenando en
us
el
or
uso
training us
de su
in the use
tecnología para
of their
lugares sin acceso
technology
a Internet.
for places without internet
Otras cosas
access.
puedo responder
Some other
cuando haya
things
preguntas.
I may be able
Thank you.
to answer when there are questions.
Thank you, Father Fernando. This whole university initiative is really exciting and fascinating to hear about. Last but not least, my colleague, Dr. Christiana Zenner, an associate professor of theology here at Fordham University. She writes widely on religious ecological ethics, and she's the author of Just Water, Theology, Ethics, and Global Freshwater Crises. This will be one free book to one of you lucky winners who can walk away with it. We also have order forms if you want to order this book or others from Orbis outside. Please take one, and one of you will get this book. Christiana, to you to wrap it up.
Thank you, David. Gracias a todos. Buen día. Lamento no hablo español, so I will speak in English. My remarks are, of course, as a professor in New York City, and I am deeply, deeply honored to be on this panel to learn from colleagues who are doing such remarkable work institutionally with expanding the Catholic Church and its attunement to Indigenous communities and the rights of nature and ecological values, and also especially to hear again from Patricia Guelinga, whom I heard on Tuesday as part of a UN side event, and Carol also to learn from your work. It's a deep, deep honor. So I come to the topics of this panel as someone who has been studying values for water and the ways in which fresh waters are contested around the planet. And because I am a white woman in a 12th story lounge in an institution in New York City, it's very evident that my experience and teaching and connections are a little bit different from the experts with whom I'm privileged to be on this panel. So I apologize if this sounds a little bit like a lecture, but there will be 5 points with some subpoints made in them. The first point I want to say is that in my humble opinion, Laudato Si, Pope Francis's 2015 encyclical on ecology, is and will be the most important legacy of Francis's pontificate. This is partly because it picks up on Catholic social teaching that has been long attested in the Catholic tradition. It is partly because it moves forward promising theological directions that mattered enormously to Benedict XVI and now to Pope Francis, especially regarding human ecology. And it is partly because that document begins to diagnose and create space for conversations about how political economic realities, extractivismo, a range of other realities, intersect with ecological degradation and the devaluation of human life in contemporary society. I have been utterly delighted to hear from colleagues on this panel how the witness of Pope Francis, both in Laudato Si, in the Amazonian Synod, in Querida Amazonia, which is available, as David Gibson just mentioned, for purchase, are playing out with regard to the Ecclesial Conference of the Amazon and Puam and more. So this is my delight to be on a panel with those who are carrying forward the legacy of Laudato Si in ways that are a theological discovery and truly listening to what is needed for the church in the present and the future, and ways that the church itself stands to learn from those who have been caretakers of waters and lands for a very long time. So the second point, I wanted to highlight a couple key points in Laudato Si and Catholic social teaching. One is that there are many different types of ecological values that function in the world today. And because I work on freshwater, I'll just use the example of freshwater. In the 1990s, it became very popular to speak of freshwater as a commodity and as a human resource. But when we speak of freshwater primarily as a resource to be engineered or mobilized towards certain political or economic ends, we also risk then framing it as a commodity, as a kind of property that can be packaged and bought and sold in ways that come nowhere near to approximating the realities of what freshwaters facilitate on this planet and the values that various cultures hold and the ethics that many cultures have around freshwaters. So one of the things that is vital is Pope Francis's articulation from his authoritative Catholic global pulpit that freshwater is a fundamental human right, and that there are ecological values and spiritual values that pertain to freshwater that are by no means encapsulated by commodity or property or resource regimes. Another key point in Laudato Si and later in Querida Amazonia and other documents has been the observation that there is regional authority on matters of ecology and cultural ethics. And it's, again, so utterly wonderful to see how this is happening with regard to the Amazon region. But I would point you, because I'm a scholar, to the footnotes in Laudato Si, where Pope Francis begins to say, well, what is going on in the world and how do we know? And how do social justice and ecological justice demand attention? And he points to bishops' conferences in different regions of the world, the Philippine bishops, the New Zealand bishops, others. So this point that you have made about the diminishment of nationalism and the attention to regional realities in an effort to be a global church, I think is very, very important. Third is a point about how Laudato Si and Catholic social teaching aptly diagnose causes of environmental degradation. Colleagues, especially Carol, have mentioned extraction and pollution, such as mercury contamination in the waters. And one of the things that is very, very important about Pope Francis's teachings and about the movement of the Catholic Church is to recognize that cultures of extraction are deeply linked to the degradation of certain environmental goods like fresh water. And this is a complex conversation because there are many political, economic forces that encourage mining and extraction. And there are sometimes jobs created for communities who may need them by these different mining industries and operations. And yet, as Pope Francis has pointed out in a number of documents, and colleagues on the panel can speak to better than I, there are also real problems with corruption and with collusion with nations and with property takings of especially indigenous communities, especially in the Amazon. So the ways in which development projects, whether hydraulic for fresh water and energy generation, or mining for different kinds of minerals in a digital economy, these continue to be huge, huge issues that are not only questions of a couple bad actors, though that is real. They are also questions of entire structures of political economy globally and within certain regions. Linked to this is the fourth point, which is really that the world is sitting in a political economy of extraction at the present moment. In South America, Latin America, this is called extractivismo, and many of the leading thinkers on this reality are indeed from South America. And so as those of us in the privileged global north who inherit the legacies of colonialism and neoliberal economic frameworks, we have so much to learn by listening to and watching and learning from our colleagues and our sisters and brothers who are in these regions, both as academics and as activists on the ground. Extraction has become the mode that supports economic growth globally. Economic growth is still the paradigm that is vaunted and appreciated by nations as they measure their success, yet it often oppresses and ruins lives, waters, community values, and ecosystems worldwide. And it is in this kind of space that theological values, and I think ethics as well, can speak to how to be human in this particular moment. And this is a challenge for individuals, but it is also a challenge for the ethics of the Catholic Church more generally. Because for a very long time, Western philosophy, Western theology have been very good at telling us how to behave as individuals. What kind of action is virtuous? What to do, what not to do? What's allowed, what's prohibited? But we are now talking about a world in which structures of economic extraction, labor extraction, and financialization govern the conditions under which people live their lives. And this is a particular challenge for, I think, Western philosophical ethics, and we have much to learn from indigenous communities here as well. My final point, which derives from this, is that I think it's really neat that in Laudato Si, Pope Francis was the first to tweet out an encyclical. So, I say that, a little bit in jest, but I think it's neat because it seems to be a document that many people, regardless of their religious affiliation, are moved by. And many people have spoken to me, admittedly, an imperfect and biased sample, but many people have spoken to me about how even as a secular Jewish feminist, or as someone who comes from a Muslim background and observes Ramadan at the present moment, Ramadan Mubarak to all who celebrate, and as someone who has left the Catholic Church, all these different kinds of people nonetheless find a kind of moral and spiritual vision that is compelling, that speaks about who it is we want to be as humans and what it is we value and want to protect. And I think that's very important because historically the Catholic Church, throughout history, we can talk about deep history and the Crusades and everything, but the Catholic Church has also been, historically, a fairly strong colonizing force that has not historically attended to indigenous values and has sought to universalize and evangelize. And my hope is that we are in a moment where that is changing, where the church may become more of a learning church. And because Indigenous is a plural, not uniform category, there is so much that Western frameworks have to learn from many, many communities in many parts of the world. So I think the challenge will be how this institution and those of us who work in its various universities and ecclesial contexts can bring that spirit forward without reinscribing the kinds of harms that have occurred in the past. This panel gives me hope that there is one such way occurring in the Amazon. It's been amazing to hear about your individual work, about the networks, about the ecclesial, institutional, activist, and legal realms. And it's a great honor to be here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Christiana, very much for that as well. And we want to open it up to questions. I'm going to take the moderator's privilege with the first question, but I hope you all will have some questions for our panelists who come from such different experiences and communities in the same area. We will have Henry's here, one of our Duffy fellows with a microphone. So raise your hand and Henry will bring the microphone over to you so you can speak into it. One thing I wanted to ask our panelists, on the United Nations web page for the water conference, they wrote, "Water is a key for the Sustainable Development Goals," the SDGs, the goals that the UN has set for promoting global sustainability, and for the health and prosperity of people and the planet. But it says our progress on water-related goals and targets remains alarmingly off track, jeopardizing the entire sustainable development agenda. You all, let's start with Cardinal Barreto. You were at the United Nations this week for this first water conference in 40 some odd years. Did you find people were listening, people were hearing? Is there any progress that you saw this week that the message is getting through? Cardinal Barreto first. Or Patricia or Cardinal Barreto, sí.
Yo pienso, el
I
solo hecho de
think
que
just the
pongan
fact
desarrollo
that they're
me
saying
preocupa.
development worries me.
Realmente me
It
preocupa que
really
busquen
worries me
fomentar
that they're
desarrollo
looking to
a través de
encourage
la
development through
utilización
the
del agua.
use
Y me
of water.
preocupa
And it
que
worries
realmente
me
no se
that they're
garantice el
not
derecho
guaranteeing
humano
the
al
human
agua.
right to
¿Y por
water.
qué me preocupa?
And why does it worry
Porque
me?
los paneles
Because in the panels,
también
there
había
were
empresas
also
extractivas,
extractive companies,
empresas mineras que
mining
utilizan
companies
mucha
that
agua.
use a lot of water.
Y pienso que
And I think
puede haber
there may be
buenas
good
intenciones de escritorio,
intentions
pero
on
yo vengo de
paper,
una realidad
but I
donde
come
las
from a
cuestiones
reality where issues
como
like
desarrollo o
development
sostenibilidad
or
no están
sustainability
funcionando.
are not working.
Donde nosotros está la
Where
contaminación.
we are, there
Donde
is
nosotros
pollution.
está la
Where we
destrucción
are, there
del
is
extractivismo.
destruction of
Donde
extractivism.
nosotros está la
Where
violación
we
de los
are, there
derechos
is the
por parte
violation
de
of the
gobiernos
rights
y
by
empresas.
governments and
Pienso que en el mundo
companies.
diplomático como
I
Naciones
think that
Unidas
in the
pueden
diplomatic
poner
world,
ese
such
término
as the
bonito.
United Nations, they can
Si me
use that
siento
nice term.
escuchada
Do I
dentro
feel
de
heard?
estos espacios, yo
Inside
creo
these
que de alguna manera
spaces,
llega.
I believe that in some way it
El
gets
problema es que
through.
lo tomen en
The
consideración.
problem is
Y yo
whether they
siempre
take
digo,
it into consideration. I always
si no
say,
nos quieren escuchar,
if they
les
don't
vamos a
want to
seguir
listen to
molestando.
us, we're
Si
going
están
to keep
hablando de
bothering them.
nuestros
And they are
territorios
talking about our
y si
territories.
llegan a destruir
And
nuestros
if they
territorios, no les
destroy
vamos a
our
dejar ingresar.
territories, we're not going to let them enter.
Así que empresas que quieran
So
invertir
companies
en
that want to
territorios como
invest in
Sarayaco
territories
sin
like
una consulta
Sarayaco
y un
without
consentimiento
consultation
van a
and
invertir
consent
en
are
pérdidas de
going
sus
to
ganancias. Y eso
lose
va
their
igual
profits.
también
And that
mensaje
also
para
goes as a
aquellas
message to
personas que
those
quieran
people
apoderarse
who
del
want to
agua.
take
lo cual
over
me
the
parece mal.
water, which I
Gracias.
think it's terrible. Thank you.
Carol, did you?
Sí, es importante
It is
entender
important to
qué es
understand
desarrollo para los
what is
pueblos
development
indígenas.
for the indigenous peoples
Desde
from
la posición
the
de Estado, desde la
perspective of the
posición de
state, from the
empresa,
perspective of the
la palabra
corporation.
desarrollo
The
muchas
word
veces
development
es
many times means
tener proyectos de
to
inversión.
have investment projects.
Pero como
But
Patricia lo
as
estaba
Patricia
diciendo,
was
un pueblo
saying, for
indígena para ellos
indigenous
de repente
peoples,
eso no
it
es
suddenly
desarrollo.
doesn't
Y
mean
también
development for them.
es que dentro de
And
estas
it is
políticas
also
de
that within
desarrollo,
these
dentro de estas políticas
developmental
sostenibles que de
policies,
las cuales se
within
han
these
ido hablando y de las
sustainable
cuales vienen
policies that we
participando,
are given,
los
which are
estados
being talked about and in which they're
se debe
participating,
de
the states
tener en
should
cuenta
and
la
must take
intervención de
into
los
account
pueblos
the
indígenas,
intervention of the
pues es
indigenous
que estas
peoples. The
políticas de
fact
desarrollo
is
van a
that
ser
these
trasladadas hacia
development
territorio indígena,
policies are going to be
vulnerando
transferred to the
las
indigenous
tradiciones
territory,
indígenas, vulnerando
violating
territorio
the
indígena,
indigenous traditions, violating the
vulnerando
indigenous
el
territory,
proceso de desarrollo
violating
que
the
cada
development
pueblo o
process
comunidad
that each
indígena
indigenous
tiene
people
planeado
or
para sí mismo
community
dentro de
has
sus
planned for
tradiciones y
itself
dentro del
within their
respeto cultural
traditions and
que ellos
within the
tienen hacia la
cultural respect
naturaleza
that
y
they
hacia
have
los
for
recursos.
nature and resources.
Es por eso que
That
para
is
mí es
why,
muy
for me,
importante
it is
tener en
very
cuenta
important
en
to
las
take into
planeaciones que
account in the
existen
planning of
de
development
estrategias de desarrollo en
strategies
los países,
in the
tomar en
countries,
cuenta a
to
los
take into
líderes
account the
indígenas,
indigenous leaders,
ya que
since
se afecta
their
directamente a su
territory is
territorio.
directly affected.
Hoy en día en mi región,
Today,
por
my
ejemplo, se
region,
está
for
hablando de la
example,
explotación del
they're
gas
talking about the
en
exploitation of
estos
gas, and
pozos de gas,
in
digamos
these
así, se
gas
encuentran ubicados en
wells
territorio
are located
indígena.
indigenous
Existe la ley de
territory.
consulta previa,
There is the law
pero
of prior consultation.
la normativa indica que es
But
una
the
consulta
law
previa que van a
indicates that
escuchar a
it's
los
a
pueblos,
prior
pero no
consultation
necesariamente
where they're going to
el
be listening
Estado
to the
va
people,
a
but the
hacer caso a
state
lo que
is
a lo que
not
los pueblos
necessarily going to pay attention
decidan
to
en
what
ese
the native
momento.
people decide
Que
at
se
that moment.
prioriza
That priority
el
is
beneficio de
given
la mayor
to the
población, digamos
benefit
así.
of the largest
Entonces
population.
hablamos
Let's
de
put it that
millones de
way.
personas que
So
están
we're
en el
talking
país
about
que se van a
millions of
beneficiar si
people
es que
in
se
the
logran
country
explotar estos
who
pozos de
will
gas,
benefit
pero va a
of these
perjudicar
gas wells
terriblemente a los pueblos indígenas
if
en
they're
los cuales se
exploded, but
encuentran
it will
estos pozos.
terribly
Es
be
por ello la
detrimental to the
importancia
indigenous
de que
peoples in
las
which
normas
the
sean
wells are
bastante
located.
claras,
That's
la
why it's
importancia de que
important
los
that the
pueblos
norms are
indígenas, sus
quite
líderes,
clear.
tengan
The
un proceso de
importance
formación
that the
para poder defender
indigenous
sus
peoples
territorios
and their
y sobre
leaders
todo que
are
tengan
part of a
voz en estos
training
espacios de
process to be
decisión.
able to defend their territories and above all to have a voice in the decision-making spaces.
Gracias, thank you.
Gracias.
Cardinal, and then
Yo quisiera, después de escuchar a Patricia y a Carol,
I would like
hacer
to say,
ya
after
explícito
listening to
una
Patricia and
denuncia
Carol,
y un anuncio.
to make an
La
explicit
denuncia
denunciation
ya lo
and
hizo
an
el
announcement.
Papa Francisco
The
cuando
denunciation was
afirmó
already made by
este
Pope Francis
sistema
when he affirmed
neoliberal
that this
consumista ha
neoliberal
fracasado.
consumerist system has
Por los
failed.
frutos se conoce el árbol, dice
By the
Jesús.
fruits
Es
you know
decir,
the tree,
hay una
Jesus
gran
says.
mayoría
That
que
is to
vive en
say, there
extrema
is a
pobreza
great
en la
majority of
humanidad.
humans
Y que
living
la
in extreme
acumulación de la
poverty,
riqueza cada vez
and
se
that the
concentra
accumulation
en
of
unos
wealth
pocos,
is
incluso
increasingly
aquí
concentrated
en
in a
Estados
few,
Unidos.
even
No es
here in the
una
United
excepción.
States. It is
En ese
no
sentido,
exception.
podemos decir
In
que
that
la
sense, we
Amazonía,
can say that the
como
Amazon,
fuente de recursos
as a
naturales,
source of
ha
natural
sido
resources,
dilapidada
has been irrationally
irracionalmente
dilapidated
por el apetito
by
de
the
dinero,
appetite for money,
con la connivencia
with the
de los
connivance
estados de nuestros
of the
propios países,
governments of
que
our
por
own
tener
countries,
más ingresos
that
con
for
los
getting more
intereses,
income with the
han hecho
stakes,
de los pueblos
they have made
amazónicos latinoamericanos
of the
pueblos
Amazonian and
como
Latin
antes se
American
llamaba, y en
people
realidad son
villages,
pueblos
as
en
they used to call
subdesarrollo.
them, but in reality they
Cuando
are
hablamos de
underdeveloped
desarrollo, como
villages.
decía
When we talk about
Carol,
development, as
estamos hablando de un
Carol
desarrollo
said,
humano
we are
integral.
talking about
No es
an
solamente
integral
lo
human
económico,
development. It
es
is not
también lo
only
cultural,
economic, it
los
is also
derechos
cultural,
sociales de las
the
personas
social rights
y
of
también
people,
de los derechos de la
and
misma
also the
naturaleza.
rights of
Por
nature
eso la
itself.
denuncia
That is
es
why
muy
Pope
clara, el Papa
Francis
Francisco
makes a
lo
very
hace.
clear
¿Cuál es el
denunciation.
anuncio? El anuncio,
And
y
what is the
quisiera
announcement?
decir
The
muy
announcement,
claramente,
and I would
es que la
like to say it
Iglesia
very clearly,
Católica ha
is that
estado
the
desde el
Catholic Church
principio de la
has been
evangelización
present
hace más
in
de
the
500 años
Amazon
presente
since
en
the
la
beginning
Amazonía.
of the
No es que la
evangelization more
Iglesia
than
Católica
500 years
recién
ago.
se
It is
interesa
not that
por
the
la
Catholic
Amazonía.
Church has
Lo
just
único
become interested
que
in the
hemos
Amazon. The
escuchado de los
only
mismos
thing
pueblos
we
originarios,
have
que
heard
la Iglesia
from the
Católica ha tenido
native people
luces y
is that the
también
Catholic
sombras.
Church has had lights and
Y ha
also
habido
shadows.
una actitud, yo diría,
And
de
there has been an
fragmentación
attitude,
en
I
el
would
proceso
say, of
evangelizador.
fragmentation in the
La
evangelization
bendición de
process.
Dios, y este es el anuncio, es que el primer
And,
Papa
and God
latinoamericano,
blessings, and that is
el
the
Papa
announcement, is that the
Francisco,
first Latin
el
Pope,
13
Pope
de
Francis,
marzo, hace 10
on
años,
March
y el
13,
día
10
de San
years
José,
ago,
19 de marzo,
and
tomó posesión
on St.
como
Joseph's Day, on
obispo
March
de Roma
19th,
y
was
pastor de la
sworn
Iglesia
as a
Universal.
bishop of
Y
Rome
ya
and
en
pastor
julio
of the
del
Universal Church.
2013, cuando
And
él
as
fue a
early
la
of
Jornada
July
Mundial
2013,
de
when
los
he went
Jóvenes
to
en
the
Río de
World
Janeiro,
Youth Day
nos
in
dijo a
Rio de
nosotros, los
Janeiro,
obispos del
he
Consejo
told us,
Episcopal
the bishops
Latinoamericano
of the
CELAM,
Latin
que
American
debíamos
Episcopal
relanzar
Council,
el
SALEM,
proceso
that we should
evangelizador
relaunch
en
the
la Amazonía.
evangelizing
Julio
process in the
2013.
Amazon.
En el
July 2013.
2014 se
In
creó la Red
2014,
Eclesial
the
Pan-Amazónica, la Red Pan,
Pan-Amazonian Ecclesial Network was
2014 en
created,
septiembre.
the Red Pan, in
Bendecido
2014
y
in September,
aprobado y alentado
blessed
por
and
el Papa
approved
Francisco.
and
La
encouraged
red
by Pope
no es
Francis.
una institución, no
The
es una
network is
estructura,
not an
pero está
institution, it
presente
is not a
en el
structure, but
territorio
it's
en
also
estos
present in the
7,5
territory,
millones de
in
kilómetros
these
cuadrados
7.5
que
million
componen la
square
Amazonía.
kilometers that
Antes la
make up
iglesia
the
estaba
Amazon.
cada uno por su
Before
lado.
the church was
Ahora con la
each
red hay
one
una
on
mayor
its own.
comunicación,
Now with the
mayor
network, there's a
visibilidad
greater
de las
communication,
violaciones
greater
de los derechos
visibility
humanos,
of the
del
violations of
deterioro
human
de la
rights,
naturaleza,
of the
y que esto
deterioration of
es
nature.
muy importante, que nos
And
ayudó mucho.
this is very
El Papa
important.
Francisco
It helped us a
convocó
lot.
un sínodo
Pope
amazónico,
Francis convened an
primera vez en la
Amazon
historia, un
synod.
sínodo de obispos
First
sobre
time
la
in
Amazonía.
history, a synod of bishops
Patricia,
on the
al
Amazon.
igual que otras
Patricia,
mujeres
as well
de la
as other
Amazonía,
women
también obispos
from
de
the
la
Amazon,
Amazonía,
also bishops from the Amazon, participated in this synod
Esto,
in
yo
Rome.
diría, marcó un inicio
This, I would say,
de lo
marked
que ahora
the beginning
podemos decir
of
con
what we
orgullo y
now
con humildad
say
al
with
mismo
pride
tiempo,
and
que
humility
tenemos
at
no
the same
solamente
time,
la REPAN, la
that
Red
we
Eclesial
not only have the Red
Pan-Amazónica en
Pan,
el
the
territorio, sino
Pan-Amazonian
tenemos
Ecclesial
una estructura
Network in the territory, but we also
jurídica,
have
canónica y pública,
a legal,
que es la
canonical, and public
Conferencia
structure,
Eclesial
which
de la
is the
Amazonía.
Ecclesial Conference of the
Para
Amazon.
mí personalmente
For
es
me
un motivo de
personally,
mucha gratitud a Dios
it is a
por el
reason of
cardenal
much
don
gratitude
Claudio
to God
Humes,
for
que falleció
Cardinal
en
Don
julio
Claudio
del año
Umes, who
pasado.
died in
Él fue
July
el
last
primer
year.
presidente de la Red
He
Eclesial
was the first
Pan-Amazónica.
president
Él fue el
of the
primer
Pan-Amazonian
presidente de la
Ecclesial
Conferencia
Network. He was the
Eclesial
first
de la
president
Amazonía,
of the
que
Ecclesial
está
Conference of the
dispuesta,
Amazon
yo diría,
that is
en el tiempo,
established,
porque, como
and
dice
I
el
would
Papa
say in time,
Francisco,
because
la
as
SEAMA,
Pope
la
Francis
Conferencia Eclesial
says,
de la Amazonía, es
the
una pequeña
SEAMA, the
plantita que
Ecclesial
está
Conference
creciendo,
of the Amazon, is a small
porque es la
plant that is
primera
growing.
conferencia eclesial
Because it
en la
is the
historia de la
first
Iglesia.
ecclesial conference in
Por
history,
eso,
in the history of church.
Patricia
That is
es
why
vicepresidenta. Hay una
Patricia
religiosa
is
también de
vice
pueblos
president.
originarios,
There is
la
also
hermana
a
Laura
religious
Vicuña,
sister
de
of
Brasil.
native people,
También
Sister
hay
Laura
un
Vicuña from
laico, que es
Brazil.
Mauricio
There's
López,
also
como
a layman,
vicepresidente, que
Mauricio
está
Lopez,
aquí
as
presente,
vice president,
y
who
hay
is
un
present
cardenal,
here as well.
el arzobispo
And
de
there is a
Manaus,
cardinal,
conmigo,
the
que conformamos
Archbishop of
esta
Manaus with me,
presidencia
who is
eclesial
part of
de la
this
Amazonía.
ecclesial
Creo que es
presidency
muy
of the Amazon.
importante
I
que
think it is very
en el
important
2022,
that
el 3 de
in
octubre, víspera
2022,
de San
on October
Francisco de
3rd,
Asís,
the eve
el
of
Papa
Saint
Francisco
Francis of
aprobó
Assisi, Pope Francis
oficialmente
officially
que la
approved
conferencia eclesial
that
ya
the
es
ecclesial
una realidad.
conference
Por
is
eso
already
quiero
a reality.
anunciarles a ustedes
That is why
que
I want
tenemos
to announce to
primera
you that we
conferencia
have the
eclesial
first
de una
ecclesial
región compuesta
conference
por 9
of a
países.
region composed of 9
Sobre todo, yo
countries.
diría un territorio de
Above all,
ultramar,
I
que
would
es el
say, an
territorio de
overseas
Guyana
territory, which
francés.
is the territory of French
Tiene un pequeño
Guiana, that
territorio
has a
amazónico
small
con el cual tenemos que
Amazonian
ir
territory
conversando
for
y
which we
haciendo. Por
have
último,
to
decirles,
start
el
discussing
Papa Francisco
and doing more.
latinoamericano
Finally, I would
asume
like to tell you
el
that the
nombre
Latin
de Francisco
American
de
Pope
Asís.
Francis assumes the name
Francisco de
Francis of
Asís,
Assisi.
europeo,
Francis of
lleno
Assisi,
de riquezas,
European,
que
full
se
of
convierte
riches,
y vive
who
pobre
becomes
entre los pobres.
and lives poor among
Y
the
esto
poor.
significa para
And
todos
this
nosotros que la
means
Iglesia
for all of
Católica es
us that the
universal.
Catholic Church
Todos somos
is universal.
franciscanos.
We
Y
are
yo soy
all
jesuita, pero digo,
Franciscans,
soy
although I'm a
franciscano
Jesuit,
de
but I
corazón
say I'm
y
a
que amo
Franciscan
la
of heart,
Amazonía,
and I
porque
love the
ciertamente
Amazon
al
because
escucharla, Patricia,
certainly
ahora
listening
ustedes se habrán dado
to
cuenta
Patricia,
que
now you have
no
realized that she
solamente
speaks
de la
not
cabeza,
only
sino también
from
del corazón,
the head, but
y nos mueve
also
a
from the
todos
heart,
a
and
trabajar
moves us all
decididamente
to
por cuidar
work
la tierra
to
y cuidar la
care
vida
for the
don de
earth
Dios
and to
para
care
todos y
for
cada uno de
life,
nosotros. Muchas
a
gracias
gift of
a
God
todos
for each of
ustedes
us.
porque
Thank
nos
you
alientan a
very
seguir
much to
caminando
all of
juntos.
you because you encourage us to continue walking together. Thank you.
I want to go to Christiana, who was at a side event at the UN, but also the Cardinal mentioned his predecessor, Cardinal Humas, who died a few months ago. And it was Cardinal Humas in the conclave 10 years ago who hugged Cardinal Bergoglio when he was elected, and he said, "Don't forget about the poor. Don't forget about the poor." And Cardinal Humas passed away, but the church has not forgotten about the poor in the Amazon, which is gratifying. Christiana, you.
I want to lift up what Patricia and Carol have observed, that the term development and even the term sustainable development can have many meanings depending on who is using them and in what ways. And many of us in the room probably know that the so-called authoritative idea of sustainable development was articulated in 1987 by the UN, the Brundtland Commission, that defined a particular version of sustainable development, which was to encourage economic growth without harming the interests of future generations. There's been much debate about this definition. In the interim, since 1987, there's also been an enormous amount of globalization and internationalization of trade in ways that were unknown and have been unprecedented. The internet, global commerce, financialization, many forms of development have taken place. And throughout the 90s, and indeed even into today, there are major economic and political institutions that link certain kinds of development loans to certain conditions regarding economic practices surrounding water, surrounding land. And so these notions of what is development and what is sustainable can be very slippery indeed. One of the things that I would advocate as a professor at a Jesuit university is that Jesuit universities, Jesuit networks have a particular opportunity to delve critically into these histories and into the ways that these ideas are deployed, not just in theology classes, but in our global business programs, in our training for all students. Those who are going into marketing, are they going to use the word sustainable uncritically to greenwash certain projects that actually have very negative consequences for societies and ecosystems? I don't think they should. I think we have an opportunity to be rigorous and to give a proof of concept. I would simply add that something I don't think has been mentioned yet is that the right to water was articulated and approved by the United Nations in the year 2010. And it was brought forward predominantly by Evo Morales of Bolivia and other representatives from South America, who also in the years surrounding 2010 had articulated the Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth. And so the ways in which societies in the so-called global north, societies like the United States, have to learn from these kinds of moral teachings that have been brought into international forums are very real. For those of us who live and work in the United States, I would caution us not to assume that the big problems are always elsewhere. Yes, there are big problems in the Amazon and elsewhere. And I mean not to diminish those at all. The Amazon has been referred to as the lungs of the world, as the mother river. These are all accurate. And at the same time, many of the same questions about extraction, about development, apply within North America, within the United States, the tar sands in Alberta, Canada, the Standing Rock water protection actions by Indigenous Americans, and community-based support across a range of affinity groups. These are all ways that alternate values for ecologies, for communities, for ethics are taking root, and they need to be listened to by the bishops and cardinals and those in the United States, just as we have a model here from colleagues in the Amazon.
Thank you, Christiana. Do we have any questions? Henry, we can have one here and then Christiana.
Sí, yo quiero decir una cosa, porque hay
Yeah,
muchos
I wanted to
problemas
say one
también
thing because
aquí en
there
los
are a lot of
Estados Unidos
problems also
sobre
here in
el
the United
aceite
States
que
about
puede
oil
destruir
that
a la
can
comunidad
destroy the
indígena
indigenous community.
también. Y yo quiero saber,
And
yo
I wanted
vivo
to
aquí en
know,
la ciudad,
I
¿qué
live
puedo
here
hacer
in the city.
nosotros
What
para
can
ayudar
I
sus
do to
esfuerzos
help your
en sus
efforts
países?
in your
Yo soy
countries?
nada más una persona.
I'm
¿Qué
just
podemos
one
hacer
person.
nosotros
What can
para
we
ayudar
do
los
to
esfuerzos?
help your
Sorry,
efforts?
my Spanish is not the best, but I just, we have so many problems here too, and we don't always protect the indigenous rights. If oil enters the waterways in the indigenous communities, that really destroys their lands. What can we do here in the United States? I live in New York City. How can we support your efforts, and what are your suggestions?
Thanks.
Empiezo respondiendo. Porque el
I'll
cardenal
begin
me
answering
debe.
because the cardinal owes me.
Yo pienso que en una ciudad como
I
Nueva York,
think
que les
that
vengamos
in
a
a
contar
city
las
like
cosas
New
que
York,
pasan en la
us
Amazonía
coming
les
to
parece
tell
lejano.
you what happens in the
Y no es
Amazon
así.
seems far away,
Enorme error.
and it is not.
Ustedes
Huge
piensen
mistake.
que a
You
causa de un
think
bioma como la
that
Amazonía todavía puede
because
tener
of
vida
a
acá.
biome like the Amazon, you
Por lo
can
tanto,
still
la
have
primera
life
cosa
here.
que pueden hacer es
Therefore, the
identificarse
first thing you can
plenamente
do is
con
to
nuestra
fully
lucha.
identify with our
Aparte de
struggle.
identificarse, asumirlas como una lucha
Apart
de
from
ustedes.
identifying
Ya
yourselves,
no solo de los
assume it
pobres
as your
pueblos
struggle.
indígenas a
Not
quienes les
only of the
violentan
poor
derechos,
indigenous
quienes están
people
sufriendo. Sí,
whose
estamos en
rights
primera
are
línea,
being
línea de frente.
violated, who are suffering.
Pero
Yes,
mucha
we
gente
are in the
piensa que
front
no les
line.
afecta y realmente
But
les
many
afecta.
people think that it
Todo lo que
doesn't
ocurre en la
affect them, but
Amazonía
it
es
does.
Y hay varias formas,
Everything that
desde formas
happens in the Amazon
personales.
affects them. And there's several
El Papa
ways,
Francisco lo
including
llama la
personal ways.
cultura del descarte,
Pope
de tratar
Francis
de no
calls
ser
it the
parte de
discard
esa cultura de
culture,
andar descartando todo el
that
tiempo
we
las
should try
cosas.
not
Hay
to
un
be part of that culture
consumismo
of
extremo que
discarding
está
things all the
afectando
time.
directamente
There is an
hacia
extreme
nuestro territorio,
consumerism that is directly affecting our
consumismo de las grandes
territory,
ciudades, tratar de
consumerism of
frenar
the big cities.
personalmente.
We should
Ayer
try
hablábamos con
to
algunos
put the
estudiantes que
brakes on
estaban
it personally.
haciendo
Yesterday, we were talking to some
que
students who
no
were trying
haya mucho
to
uso de
reduce
plástico,
the
estaban
use of
reciclando. Yo creo que
plastic.
son formas
They
también,
were
pero
recycling.
también formas de
I believe that
solidarizarse y
those
de
are
tener
also ways,
empatía con
but
pueblos que
also ways
luchan
to show
en Ecuador,
solidarity
en
and
Perú,
empathy
en
with the
Brasil.
people who are struggling in Ecuador,
Hay
Peru,
muchas
Brazil.
formas de apoyar, hasta de dar
There are
una
many
firma
ways
para los
to
llamados de
support,
auxilio,
even giving a
hasta
signature
presionar
for the
a
calls of
gobiernos
help,
diciendo estamos
even
atentos de lo que está
pressuring
pasando en este
governments,
país
saying
como
that we are
ciudadanos del
aware of
mundo,
what is happening in this
hasta de
country as
empezar
citizens
a
of the
conocer
world,
más de la Amazonía.
even
Mucha
starting
gente
to
inclusive
learn
apoya
more
con
about the
recursos a
Amazon.
través de Cáritas,
Many
a través de
people
la
even
iglesia.
support
Hay
with
formas,
resources through
pero
Caritas,
también hay
through the
formas
church.
que
There
no
are ways.
solamente involucran
But
recursos, que
there are
involucra
also
la
ways that are
decisión
not
personal de
only
cada
that
persona
not only involve
de
resources, that involve the personal
hacer
decision of each
solidaridad,
person
empatía,
to
de
show
identificarse,
solidarity,
de sentir
empathy,
la Amazonía
to
así está en Nueva
identify
York.
themselves, to feel the Amazon, even if you're in New York.
Otra forma de apoyar a la
And
Amazonía
another way to
es
continue to support the Amazon
comprometiéndonos en la
is
defensa de la
by
misma.
committing ourselves to its defense.
El compromiso
The
debe ser un
commitment
compromiso interno, un
must be
compromiso desde
an
nuestra
internal
posición, desde donde
commitment, a commitment
estamos,
from our position,
continuar
from where we
fortaleciendo
are,
estos espacios de escucha
to
es muy
continue
importante para que
strengthening
podamos
these
dar a conocer qué es
listening
lo que está
spaces so
pasando.
that we
De
can
igual
make known
forma,
what is happening.
el
Likewise,
contribuir a procesos de formación
contributing to training
también es
processes
importante.
is also
Es un gran
important.
camino
This is
que
a great
se ha
path
venido
that
trazando, que se
has
está
been
avanzando, pero
traced
aún
and
se
that
tiene
is
que continuar
advancing, but
fortaleciendo
we
esos
still
procesos de
have to
formación,
continue strengthening
continuar con
their
procesos de
training processes,
investigación sobre la
continue to
realidad
research
amazónica y ver
processes on
también
the
cuáles son
Amazon
las
reality, and
alternativas
also to see what are the
desde la academia
alternatives
para poder ver
from the
los caminos de
academia to
solución
be
en el
able to
futuro.
see the ways of
Hacer
solution in the
incidencia
future, to have
a través
an
de los espacios en los
impact
cuales
through the
podemos
spaces
participar
in which
respecto a
we
la
can
problemática que
participate
hay
with
en
respect
normativas y
to
hacer
the
que los
problems that
conceptos de
exist in
desarrollo
regulations
o
and to make
desarrollo
sure that the
sostenible
concepts of
sean
development
conceptos
or
que se
sustainable
reflejen a la
development
realidad,
be concepts that
sin
reflect reality
hacer a un lado
without leaving aside
a los
the
actores directos
direct
que se
actors
encuentran en la
that are
Amazonía.
found in the Amazon.
Cuidar la Amazonía no solo es cuidar
Caring
los
for the
bosques o los
Amazon is not
recursos,
only
cuidar la
caring for the
Amazonía es
forest
cuidar
or the
a
resources.
quienes
Caring for the
vivimos
Amazon
ahí,
is caring for
quienes están
those
dentro
of
de
us
todo
who
este
live
proceso.
there, those who are part of this whole process. Thank you.
You just identify yourselves when you ask a question for.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name's David Vassar. I work at the Quinn Library right across the lawn. Come see us. We have great books, print books even. And on the third floor, we have this great assets. It's a water cooler that is bottomless, right? Okay, good fresh water. All you can drink. Bring your own container, please. That's all I ask. Thank you all for your presentations. It's so rich to get all this information and sharing. One of the groups I'm involved with recently is Food and Water Watch. We have campaigns mostly geared toward getting New York State to move to renewable energy, to get fracked gas completely out of our energy loop. If some of you want to get involved locally, take a look at Food and Water Watch, Rise and Resist, Fridays for Future, the group of your choice. Get involved if you like to. Call your local assembly members. I have a very stubborn assembly member in my district who has not yet signed on to the All Electric Building Act. And this does have repercussions worldwide. Everyone in COP27, the Conference of Parties recently, was looking at what was happening in New York City. It matters. We're trying to electrify our buildings, get completely off fracked gas, increase building energy efficiency. Buildings are a huge, huge source of pollution in our city. 70% of our emissions come from our buildings. I'll leave the specific. I'll spare all of you more specifics. Many things come to mind. A neighbor just contacted me just before I came here, telling me that the Cathedral of St. John at the 112th and Amsterdam Avenue was having a program on making amends to our African American community for slavery, which has been an American plague that we really need to keep healing from. And I was struck by the comparison in a way, thinking of the Catholic Church as a colonizer in a sense. And that, I'll get to my question. It really,
We're a little short.
there is a question here in this muddle. I'm not getting any younger, but colonizing makes me think military. Okay, what is our military internationally doing? I don't think the military has been mentioned in any great extent yet, but they are a huge player also in the environmental state of our planet. The US Navy recently had this awful disaster in Hawaii, poisoning the drinking water of many members of that community and this reminds me of what's happening in the Amazon. A local American attorney there, Stephen Donziger, you may have heard of, has been busy trying to help the Ecuadorian communities in particular get recompense from Chevron for all of its degradation of that environment. But getting back to the military, how, and similar, as to the previous question, how can we mobilize this huge, gigantic, hugely funded institution of ours to move from a military operation to one of real national security, which would be to build out our renewable energy system, to protect our waters and lands. Any comments about the military's role
Yeah,
at
let
all.
me, Christiana, can you handle that? That would be great.
David, you are a stellar colleague. David, for those of you who may not know, avidly and regularly sends out notices to environmental studies related faculty and others about events going on in New York City related to ecological ethics, and also all the new titles that a person could read in, well, life is sadly too short to read all the books that it is good to read, but thank you for your work in the library and your example of how to live ethically. The question of militarism. The US military is the largest source of fossil fuel emissions and related pollution in the United States. It is the largest emitter, and it is often excluded from conversations about action on climate change. So while that is true for the United States, it is true in various ways for other countries, and how militarism as practice as well as ethos looks in a given place is a conversation to happen region by region, but also globally. And I want to pinpoint your observation that national security, like sustainable development, can be subject to a range of interpretations. Ecological flourishing and social justice need to be part of that. Granted, I'm not a military general, I'm an ethics professor, but I am the daughter of two naval pilots. The daughter of a naval pilot and the granddaughter of a naval pilot on my paternal side, rather. And so I understand the legacies of militarism, but militarism done well needs to point towards real security. And the ways in which states and militaries and autocracies and extractive interests collude in many parts of the world is very, very problematic and does need attention.
Let me, just on time, let me just identify yourself first. Thank you.
I'm Nancy Lawrence, and I'm part of a network of Catholic churches, parishes here in New York, called Metro New York Catholic Climate Movement. And we try to address some of these issues in the various parishes that are part of our network. And I encourage any of you who are part of a parish that are not part of our network, talk to us. There are several of us in the room here, Julia, Terry, me. Okay. And I just want to ask one thing about the human rights violations and the death threats. Is there any, I mean, to me, that's one thing that we can do is raise that issue when that becomes a critical point of what people are doing to defend their land or their water. And I'm part of a network that talks to people from different dioceses around the country that are also, you know, trying to live out Laudato Si. That's just one network, though, but we need to form, it seems to me, a network that's broader than that, that gets out some kind of an urgent action when it's needed. And I don't know who the appropriate organization or institution would be for doing that, but it seems to me we do need that, and that might be helpful. That's one thing. And then the second thing, and I'll try to be brief, is that we are supporting something that challenges our country and our emissions by supporting the Earth Bill. Okay, it's a prophetic sort of bill that addresses emissions in 3 sectors of our economy. One is in the production of electricity to make it renewable, 100% renewable. The second is transportation, trying to get all electric cars by 2030. And the third is the sector of agriculture and trying to get corporate agriculture to be regenerative and not emitting so many emissions. So we have a few flyers here. Talk to us afterwards if you're interested in supporting this bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your presentation and your presence here, which is really, really important to us.
And I think those this is a great network, a great program, and I'm hoping some of the things you refer to will be a fruit of the visit here at Fordham and the UN going forward. They had a great meeting with our president, Tanya Tetlow, who is extremely committed to this issue, and we hope for greater fruits. One thing and thank you for that, and let me direct that, because one of the books we have here is The Eco-Martyrdom in the Americas, and this struggle is a life and death struggle so often, which we don't realize enough. Could you, one of you, just address Father Fernando or Carol, you know, the the risks, the threats, the life and death challenges that you face when you advocate and do the activism that you are doing?
De repente,
Maybe
no ha sido directo, pero sí a
it
nivel de
has
la
not been
región Madre de
direct,
Dios en
but
los
at the
últimos
level of
años,
Madre de Dios region in the last few years,
hemos tenido ya
we
7 asesinatos de
have
defensores ambientales
already had 7 murders of environmental defenders
en una región de
in a
200,000
region
habitantes,
of
más o menos.
200,000
Entonces,
inhabitants,
el
more or
riesgo es
less.
bastante alto.
So the risk is quite high.
Hemos tenido casos directos que
We
hemos
have
acompañado que
had
también han
direct
sido amenazados
cases that
líderes
we have
indígenas.
assisted in which
Y
indigenous leaders have also been
y
threatened, and
lastimosamente es lenta la reacción del
unfortunately,
Estado cuando
the
pedimos
reaction
garantías
of
para
the
las
government
víctimas.
is slow when we ask for
Creo que
guarantees
la
for their
situación
lives,
crítica,
right?
que es en un momento de
I
vida cuando
believe that there
llegamos,
is a
yo creo que la situación
there was
crítica
a
la
critical
estamos viviendo
situation
hoy
when we
día.
arrived at this. I believe that the
Abusos,
critical situation is what we are
la
living
vulneración de
today, the
derechos,
abuses, the
el no
violation of
acceder
rights, the
a una
lack
protección
of
inmediata,
access to immediate
es
protection.
algo que se está
It is
palpando y
something
es cada
that
vez
is
mucho más
being
fuerte
felt,
porque los
and it
intereses
is becoming
económicos
much
en la
stronger
Amazonía
because the
también son cada
economic
vez mucho más
interests in
grandes.
the Amazon are also becoming
Entonces,
much
la
larger.
forma de
So
protección
the
que de alguna
form of
forma se tiene es
protection
el
that
respaldo
we
de las
have in some
instituciones,
ways,
el
the
respaldo de la
support
iglesia en su
of the
vicariato,
institutions, the
es
support of the
bastante
church
importante para
within the
el
vicariate,
trabajo que
it
realizamos
is very
en
important
territorio.
for the work that we do in the territory.
El tener espacios donde se pueda
To
hacer
have
escuchar
spaces
lo que
where
está
we
pasando
can make
y de
what
alguna
is
forma tener esta
happening
imagen
heard, and
pública,
to
digamos
be
así,
in some
también es
way, and to
parte de
have
la
this public
seguridad, porque de alguna
image,
forma
let's put it that way,
te
it is also
desarrollas en
part of the
ambientes
security,
donde puedes
because in
sentirte
some
seguro y
way
dar a
you can
conocer qué es lo que
develop
está
in
sucediendo.
environments where you can feel safe and
Las
make known
denuncias
what is
locales
happening. Local
son de mayor
complaints
riesgo
are a
porque
higher
creo que es
risk
bastante conocido
because
que en los países de
I think
Latinoamérica
it
la
is well
corrupción es
known that in
bastante
Latin
alta.
American countries
Entonces, el hacer
corruption
una
is quite
denuncia ante la
high,
policía o
so
la
making a
fiscalía
complaint to the
tarda
police or
mucho,
the public
expone
prosecutor's
mucho a las
office
personas.
takes a long time,
Como
and it exposes
estrategia
people a lot.
realmente
As a strategy, we
hemos empezado a
have
trabajar a hacer
really
denuncias en
started to
otros
work to
espacios ante la
make
CNDH.
complaints
Para
in
eso,
other
para nosotros
spaces
es
before
importante tener
the
el acompañamiento de
OAS, and
quienes nos vienen
that's why it's
guiando en
important
estos
for us to
procesos
have the
a
support
través
of the people
de
that have been
REPAM, que
guiding
ha
us
pasado
in
por
these
todo un
processes
proceso de
through
formación para
REPAM,
que podamos
which
dar a
has
conocer estos
allowed us to
casos.
go through a whole
Antes
training
nos quedábamos
process
en
so we
territorio,
can
nos
make
quedábamos
these
a nivel
cases known.
local,
Before we
hacer la
stayed in the
denuncia a nivel
territory,
local,
we stayed at a
pero
local
nos hemos
level,
dado cuenta
making the
que esto
denunciation at
es
the
un
local
proceso
level. But we
muy
have realized
difícil,
that this is
muy
a very difficult
complicado,
and
que pone en
complicated
riesgo a
process,
quienes están siendo
which puts
afectados
those who are
directamente.
directly affected
El
at risk.
presentar los casos o las
Presenting
vulneraciones
cases or
en otros
violations in
espacios
other
nos
spaces
ayuda muchísimo
help us a lot
porque
because
protege
it
mucho a quien
protects
está
the
denunciando.
person who is
Así tú
denouncing.
hagas una denuncia anónima dentro de
Because
territorio,
when an anonymous
todos terminan sabiendo
denunciation
quién
is
hizo
made
esa
within the
denuncia. No estamos
territory,
exponiendo a
everyone
quienes
ends
van a
up
denunciar.
knowing who
El
is
hacer las
filing the
denuncias
allegation, and we're
en otros espacios
exposing
nos
those
ayuda
who
a que
are
tomen en
going to
cuenta la
denounce.
problemática que
Making the
está
accusation in
pasando
other
y se
spaces
aborde de
helps
otra
us to
manera,
take into
sin
account the
exponer a los
problems
líderes
that
que
are
están
happening
presentando las
and to address
denuncias.
them in a different way without exposing the leaders who are making the denunciations.
Yo soy parte de un colectivo de mujeres
I'm part of a
que
women's
nos denominamos
collective
defensoras de la selva.
where we call
Y
ourselves
como nunca nos
defenders of the
quedamos
jungle.
calladas,
We
2018,
never stay
5
silent,
de
and
nosotras
in
recibimos amenazas de
2018,
muerte.
5 of us
Entre ellas yo.
received death
Una
threats.
madrugada
Among them,
llegaron y destruyeron la casa.
one early morning they came to
¿Qué puedes
destroy
hacer en una
our
situación
homes.
así?
What can you
Lo que yo
do
hice
in a
fue
situation
poner
like
una
that?
denuncia
What I did
inmediatamente.
was to file a complaint immediately.
Pero
But
empezamos a trabajar en varios
we
niveles.
started to work on several
Denuncia
levels.
interna,
Internal
porque para
complaint,
que haya una constancia,
because
aún sabiendo que
so
eso
that
no
there
van a
is a
investigar.
record. Even
Aún
knowing
sabemos
that
que eso
they
no va a
are not going to
prosperar.
investigate, we already
La
knew that
segunda
it's not going to
cuestión
prosper.
llamamos a
The
un
second
apoyo
item,
de solidaridad
we call
internacional.
for international solidarity support.
Amnistía Internacional logró recoger casi
Amnesty
300,000
International
firmas a nivel
managed to
global,
collect almost
visibilizando el rostro de
300,000
las 5
signatures
mujeres.
globally, making the faces of the 5 women
Eso ayudó
visible.
un poco porque Como yo
That
fui
helped a little
testigo,
because as I
traductora en la
was a
Corte
witness
Interamericana en el caso
and
Sarayuca, también la Corte
translator of
Interamericana
the
preguntó
Inter-American
al
Court in the
Estado de Ecuador
Sarayuca
qué
case,
pasaba
and
conmigo.
the Inter-American Court
Entonces
also asked
empiezas
the
a mover
government of
varias
Ecuador what
instancias
was
de protección
happening
de
with me.
derechos humanos.
Then you begin to move several instances of
Visibilizas
human
de
rights
alguna manera a
protection.
las
In
personas que
some
están
way,
en
you
riesgo.
make visible the people who are
Mantuve
at risk.
protección policial
I was
por un
under
año,
police
casi
protection for
aproximadamente.
about
No
a year,
podía moverme a ningún lado
approximately.
sin
I could not
policías a mi
move
alrededor.
anywhere without police around me.
Y
And
es feo
it was
estar en esa
ugly to be
situación
in
porque
that
no sabes a
situation
quiénes pueden
because you don't
atacar, si
know
a tus
who they
padres, a
might
tus hijos, a
attack,
tu
your
esposo,
parents,
todo el
your
mundo está
children,
como
your
súper
husband,
controlado.
everyone is
Cuando
like
sabes
super
que
controlled.
también
And when you
la
know
institución
that also the
policial
police, the institution
de
of
justicia
justice,
son los
are the
agresores.
aggressors, I
Pero
mean,
tampoco puedes decirle
but
que
you
no, porque podría
can't
ocurrir
say
como con
no
Berta
either
Cáceres.
because then it could
Entonces,
happen like with
eso en una
Berta
situación.
Cáceres. So there is
Pero
that
también
in
no
that
es
situation.
gratis que
But
nos
also,
amenazan.
it is not for free that we are
¿A qué
being threatened.
¿A quiénes les
The
estamos
question here
molestando?
is, who are we
Y en
bothering?
nuestro caso eran las
And in our
empresas
case, it
petroleras,
was the oil
porque le habíamos
companies
mandado
because we had
abajo las rondas
stopped
de
the rounds
negociaciones
of oil
petroleras.
negotiations.
Varias rondas
Several
fueron
rounds went
a nuestra
through
movilización y no
our
habían prosperado.
mobilization and they didn't prosper.
¿Quiénes son los dueños de
And
las
who are the
petroleras?
owners of the oil
Ellos sí que
companies?
tienen una red
They have
impresionante,
an
más organizados
impressive
que nadie.
network, more organized than anyone else.
Pero
But
siempre, si empiezas a
always,
seguir
if you
esa red,
start to
alguien está
follow that
poniendo la
network,
plata.
there's always
Y
someone
muchas
putting
veces
the
son gente
money.
que no sabe,
And many
que están
times they are people
invirtiendo
who
en
don't know that
combustibles
they're
fósiles.
investing in fossil
Yo digo
fuels.
esto porque ahí
And
sí
I say
ustedes
this
pueden actuar
because
fuertemente.
there
Y
you
pueden
can
estar
act
acá,
strongly.
pueden estar en Europa,
You can be
pueden estar en
here,
las
you can be
diócesis,
in Europe,
pueden
you
ser
can be
los
in the
bancos que están
diocese,
aquí, Banco
it can be the
Interamericano,
banks that
Banco
are here,
Mundial.
Inter-American Bank, the
Y
World
ahí
Bank,
se tiene que hacer la
and that's
incidencia,
where
porque
you
ahí les
have
duele,
to
ya que
make an
llegaste,
impact
ya no
because
estás en la
that's where
cola
it hurts.
de
Now
todo,
that
estás
you have
llegando a
reached
donde
them, you are
ellos
no
ponen
longer
su
at the
economía.
tail end
Y
of
empezarles
everything.
a
You are
visibilizar en esos
getting to where
ámbitos
they
la
put their
violación de los
money and
derechos
starting to
humanos,
make visible in
sí
those
afecta
areas that the violation
y
of
sí da
human rights
resultados.
does
Ahí
have an
tendrían que moverse
impact.
ustedes.
And that's
Igual,
where
si
you
es en
get
Ecuador o en
results.
Perú,
And the
la
same
red
thing,
de
if it is in
católicos va
Ecuador
y
or
le
Peru, the
reclama y le
network
dice, estamos
of
preocupados
Catholics
al
goes and
gobierno de Ecuador
complains
a
and
través de
says
la
we're
embajada, a
concerned
través de
about
la
the government of
representación de
Ecuador through the
Naciones
embassy,
Unidas.
through the
Hicimos eso
representation
con
of
el
the
pueblo. Cada vez que el presidente
United
salía,
Nations.
teníamos
We did
aliados, por
that
lo menos
as
15
members
personas
of
en
our
cada
people.
país,
Every
donde
time
estaban
we
diciendo
went out, we
Sarayaku
had
con un
allies, at
letrero
least
y no
15
destruyas
people
a este
with
pueblo. Son
signs saying
formas muy
Sarayaku, don't
efectivas
destroy our
de
town.
tratar de
These are very
proteger a los que
effective
luchamos
ways
en
to
territorio.
protect those who are fighting in our territories.
Last question for each of you. 30 segundos, 30 seconds. So much difficult news, the most recent climate change prediction that came out. Where do you personally find hope? Other Fernando, let's start with you. The hardest question.
Yo creo que hay algo de esperanza
I think
en
there's some
bueno,
hope.
yo hablo también como,
And well,
como
I speak also
universitario, académico,
as a
en pensamientos creativos de
university
la
or
economía.
academic
Yo
in
escucho
creative
un
thinking in
concepto de
economics.
el bien
I hear a
común
concept of
y
the
su
common good
relación con la
and its
innovación en el ámbito
relationship to
público-privado.
innovation in the
Creo que eso me
public-private
parece algo
sphere.
bastante interesante
I
porque
think
no
that I find
contrapone
that quite interesting
lo
because it
público y lo
doesn't
privado, sino
counterpose the
encuentra un
public and the
concepto más
private,
amplio que es
but finds a broader
el agua como bien
concept,
común.
which is
Digamos,
water
eso
as a
para mí
common
fue
good.
bastante
That for me was
ilustrativo y
quite
esperanzador en
illustrative and
esta
hopeful in
conferencia.
this
Puede
conference.
ser
Maybe
poco, puede
little,
ser
it
muy
may be
teórico, pero
theoretical, but
algo ayuda.
something helps.
Carol, where do you find hope?
Yo creo que la
I
esperanza
think
es,
the hope is
el
the
compromiso que
commitment
cada
that
uno va
everyone
generando.
generates.
Creo
I
que el
think
escuchar
listening
y
and
el hacer
to
nuestra esta
make this
problemática
problem
y
our
el
own
querer
and
ver
to want to
cuáles son
see what
posibles
the possible
soluciones y la
solutions
esperanza.
are is
Y
the hope.
sobre todo,
And
la
above
esperanza
all, the
son los
hope
líderes y
that
las
the
lideresas que cada
leaders and
vez
the
van ganando más
churches
espacio
that are
y
gaining more and more
se les está
space,
generando
and they're
también
also generating the
los espacios
appropriate
adecuados para que
spaces for
ellos
them to
puedan continuar con su
continue their
lucha
struggle.
y esta
And this
resistencia que es
resistance that is
permanente por parte de
permanent
los pueblos
on the part of
indígenas.
the indigenous people.
Cardinal.
Para mí es
For
una
me, it is
llamada
a
a una
call for
esperanza
an
activa
collective hope.
una
a
esperanza que se
hope
traduzca en una
that
acción.
translates into action.
Y creo que es muy
And
importante que
I
todos
think it's very
estamos
important
llamados
that we
a
are all
una
called to
conversión de
a
mentalidad
conversion of
y una
mentality,
conversión
a
también del
conversion
corazón.
of heart as
No
well.
es solamente
Not
ustedes aquí
only
en Estados
you
Unidos
here in the
que
United
tienen
States
que
have to think
pensar en
about
cómo
how
poder
to
ayudar a la
help the
Amazonía.
Amazon.
En nuestros propios
In our own
países
countries,
también
there
hay
is
mucha
also a lot
discriminación,
of
mucho
discrimination,
racismo.
a lot of
Hay
racism.
un
There
desprecio
is a
al otro
contempt for the
porque no
other
son como
because they're
nosotros, entre
not like
comillas.
us, in
Por
quotation marks.
tanto, creo que hay
Therefore,
una
I
llamada muy
believe that there
fuerte
is a very
a
strong
una
call to
conversión
a
sincera a
sincere
Dios, a los
conversion
demás
to God,
y
to
también a la
others, and
naturaleza.
also to nature.
Esta conversión
This
nos hace
conversion makes
hermanos
us
y
brothers
hermanas
and
caminando
sisters
juntos
walking
por el bien
together
de
for
la
the
creación
sake
que
of the
Dios nos ha
creation that God
concedido
has granted
participar.
us to participate in.
Mi esperanza es
My
en la
hope
acción.
is in action.
La acción de ustedes,
Your
la acción de
action, the
nosotros.
action
Los jóvenes
of all
que
of
creo que
us
empiezan
and
a
the
tener una
youth
conciencia más
who
que
I
nosotros.
think are beginning to
Y
have a consciousness more than us,
la
and
resistencia en territorio.
that of a
Mientras
resistance
haya
in
resistencia en
territory. As long as
territorio,
there is resistance in
logremos impedir
territory
que las
and we
empresas ingresen
manage
y
to
sigan
prevent the
destruyendo
companies from
y haya
entering and
solidaridad
continuing to
internacional y
destroy,
compromiso,
and
hay
there is
acción
international
y esperanza.
solidarity and commitment, there is action
Thank
and
you.
hope.
I think I joined Christiana, who said earlier, my own hope in a sense is your presence here, your effort, your activity, your faith, and your hope. That is great, gives us hope. I hope we can be partners in that. Please join me in thanking our panelists today. We have coffee up here. Please engage in conversation. Also, in about a week, we will have this conversation on YouTube, edited. We will share it with you all. Please share it with the rest of the world. It's not just who's here today, it's who hears it later on. Thank you very much.